Chapter 222. The commander of cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked down at the meadow without any expression on his face. He did not care about the life and death of the people in the camp of the grain team. He just wanted to see if there would be a suitable opportunity for him to send troops in the chaotic situation. Suddenly, a violent vibration of the chi of heaven and earth came from the meadow. The powerful and wonderful aura of talisman Taoism directly and clearly reflected in his sense of perception, which made his expression change dramatically. Kuni Mati, the old lady, was as hard as stone. When she saw the horse gang waving their machetes to kill the Yen soldiers who had no time to escape, the wrinkles on her face did not even tremble a little. But when the carriage was broken into pieces and the girl in white floated in the air to draw the talisman, the wrinkles on her face suddenly changed from the lines carved on the stone to the tangles in the wind. They all piled up together and she looked extremely shocked. The talisman master in the camp is actually her. She can actually draw the infinitive talisman. Has she already entered the knowing destiny state? Kuni Mati looked gloomy and looked back at the carriage in the middle of the cavalrymen. She secretly thought about how her niece, who was spoiled and treasured by her, would react if she knew this fact. The curtain of the carriage was closed. The girl who was as quiet and pure as an orchid felt the terrible talisman power from the meadow. She slowly raised her head and revealed a trace of understanding on her face. She whispered to herself, "It turns out to be Sister Mo." Through the curtain, she could guess who the talisman master was just by the fluctuation of the talisman power. It seemed that this flower-like girl was not ignorant of what happened under the meadow outside the carriage. The half-divine talisman turned into an invisible high-speed air mass. Like a giant fist made by a god, it instantly tore the air above the camp and punched a huge hole in the wall of fire. More than 10 horse gang members were killed by the shock. Then it came to the horse gang leader and suddenly condensed with the winter wind. The leader of the horse gang knew that his life was at stake at this critical moment. With a muffled groan, his fingers hanging on the side of the saddle trembled violently. His thumb tapped on the lines of his middle and index fingers at high speed, forcing out all the psyche power in his sense of perception. The strong psyche power accumulated by decades of meditation left his body and fiercely collided with the power of the divine talisman. The strange power collided, causing the air around the horse gang leader to have countless strange white lines. These white lines were extremely fine turbulence in the air. Because of the difference in speed with the surrounding air flow, it caused the light to be refracted greatly, which was why it appeared white. The blacking out was not completely caused by the injury caused by the pain, but really blacked out. Because the big black umbrella floated over. Under the big black umbrella, the padao in Ning Kei's hand directly chopped out, and the momentum of the knife was concise and clear. The blade entered the flesh and then broke the bone. It was just a matter of a moment. With a swish, the arm flew to the sky. A terrible bloody wound appeared on the right shoulder of the horse gang leader, and blood gushed out like a fountain. The momentum of the padao was not exhausted. He cried out in pain and fell to the rear of the horse, falling heavily to the ground. Just before landing, his skinny right hand pointed to Ning Kei, who was about to fall on his back, and suddenly opened it. Ning Kei was seriously injured again, and his chest and abdomen were suffocated. He spat out blood again and fell down. He just fell on the horse that originally belonged to the horse gang leader. He did not feel the sweet and fishy taste between his lips and tongue. Before his consciousness was blurred, the padao in his hand broke the wind and chopped again. But it was not the horse gang leader who had been shaken off, but the horse's buttocks. A deep bloody wound suddenly appeared on the horse's buttocks. The horse was shocked by the pain, and madly rushed forward, bumping into the still burning wall of fire. There was another hole below the transparent hole in the wall of fire in front of the camp, which was pierced by the divine talisman. A burning galloping horse, carrying the seriously injured and weak Ning Kei, roared out of the hole. The horse's mane and tail had already been burned to ashes, and the galloping horse's body was spitting fire. The fire caused by the burning fire talisman was extremely terrible. The galloping horse forcibly rushed through and was instantly burned to death, falling heavily to the ground. Ning Ke on the horse's back fell to the ground with a bang at the same time, rolling several times continuously before stopping. Although he was protected by the big black umbrella, the corners of his clothes were still spitting fire, which could be ignited at any time. He sat on the ground awkwardly, turned his head to look at a place, and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Water." According to his previous instructions, Cat Girl prepared a large bucket of water and waited by his side. She had not participated in the defense. Seeing her senior sisters fighting with the horse gang, she was so anxious that she wanted to kick over the bucket of water. She did not expect that the battle situation would change so quickly, and it was not until now that she understood Ning Ke's previous intention. With a splash, the whole bucket of water was poured on Ning Ke's body. The burning fire on his clothes was instantly extinguished, and his weak body was directly knocked to the ground by the bucket of water that was poured on his head. The big black horse galloped from one side of the camp to the front of him. It lowered its head and kept nudging Ning Ke's body, looking very anxious and uneasy. It seemed that it was worried that after Ning Ke fell down, he would never be able to stand up again. Ning Ke fell on the wet ground and indeed had no strength to stand up. Fortunately, he did not pass out. He opened his eyes and looked at the horse's face that was very close to his face, and a very difficult smile appeared on his face. Since the beginning of the war, especially when he assassinated the leader of the horse gang, he had encountered countless extremely dangerous situations and innumerable pain. According to the requirements of human instinct, when faced with the pain that the body and spirit could not bear, he would automatically pass out. However, he seemed to have some kind of talent that went against the body's instinct, and forcibly maintained the last trace of consciousness. He raised his right arm with difficulty and put the big black umbrella that looked dirtier than before on his chest. Then he put the brocade bag that had been tied on his middle finger into his arms. After doing these two things, he was really relieved, but still did not pass out because of mental relaxation. He stabbed the tip of the knife into the wetland beside him, and stood up with a muffled groan. Looking at the fighting sounds coming from the camp, he wanted to go and help, but found that his body, which had been seriously injured by the psyche power, did not listen to his orders. He had done what he should do, so he should not die, right? As for those people who were bathed in blood and fighting around the carriage array, he could not change anything at this time. Thinking of something, Ning Ke looked back. In the middle of the messy camp, the carriage that had already collapsed into pieces was only left with a board at the bottom. Mo Shanshan was currently sitting on that board. Her white robes were covered in mud for an unknown amount of time. The young talisman master had previously forcibly used the divine talisman that only divine talisman masters could use, which was beyond her state ability. She had suffered a very serious backfire, and the psyche power in her sense of perception had been squeezed out, so she directly passed out in the air and fell down. Perhaps because of the shock, Mo Shanshan had already woken up at this time. She slightly lowered her head, and the black hair on her forehead was very messy. Her right hand was pressed on the ground to support her body, and the slender eyelashes vaguely visible among her hair kept trembling. Her pale cheeks were full of weakness, and it seemed that she would faint again at any time. Suddenly there came a faint sound like thunder in the distance. Looking at the smoke and dust above the meadow, Ning Ke knew that the team of cavalrymen of Divine Hall was tempted as he had expected. He said to Cat Girl beside him, when cleaning up the battlefield later, "Grab my 2 knives for me." The fire wall in front of the camp was mainly to create a chance for Ning Ke to assassinate the leader of the horse gang. The coverage area was not large, and it was far from enough to stop those horse gangs. During the time of the previous tangled battle, the horse gang rushed in, waving their cutlasses and whistling. At this time, the array of carriages composed of carriage boards and grain bags had long been damaged. The Black Ink Garden disciples' knives were like snow, and they resolutely fought against them without retreating. Those soldiers and civilians of Yan Kingdom suffered heavy casualties in a very short time. At this time, the leader of the horse gang was nowhere to be found. It was unknown whether he was seriously injured and taken away by his trusted subordinates, or he was already dead, and his body was trampled into mud by the hooves of the horses. This fact brought a great impact to the horse gang. The charging formation of the horse gang was already in a mess, but the defense power in the camp was also on the verge of a desperate situation. If the cavalrymen of Divine Hall above the meadow still did not move at this time, then no one could predict whether the camp would be massacred first, or the horse gang would collapse first under the pressure. The bigwigs on the meadow were all shocked by Mo Shanshan's shocking half-divine talisman, so they did not pay much attention to Ning Kai, who jumped over the fire wall and finally killed the leader of the horse gang. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall sensed something, and his sharp eyes noticed a faint black shadow on the other side of the raging firewall, but he did not see the specific situation at that time. But, he saw that the leader of the horse gang was seriously injured and then was forcibly taken away by several cavalrymen. He also saw that the horse gang was in chaos and the signs of collapse at this time. They did not rush down the meadow to rescue people in the camp before because the 200 or 300 fierce horse gang were well guarded and good at fighting. The commander did not want to risk the noble lives of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. But now the leader of the horse gang was dead, and the collapse was inevitable. It was a good chance for the cavalrymen of Divine Hall to show their strength and collect military achievements. As a leader who was good at fighting, he certainly would not miss this opportunity. The horse gang is killing the followers of Haotian. As the papal guardians of Divine Hall, you know what to do. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall drew out the sword at his waist, pointed at the chaotic camp of the grain team below the meadow, and said in a low voice. The sun shone on his serious and righteous face, which looked extremely holy. For the light, go forward. The so-called funeral affairs were all sad things. The soldiers of Yan Kingdom who were covered with wounds supported each other. Looking at the corpses of their companions lying everywhere, and the broken limbs and pools of blood, they could not feel the lucky joy of surviving a disaster. Many people began to wail loudly, and the cries in the camp shook the sky. There is another chapter of 5,000. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 223. Listening to the continuous crying in the camp, the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly frowned. He could understand the indifference of the disciples of Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom, but he did not care about their indifference. Instead, he was a little disdainful and sarcastic. Ignoring them, he raised his right hand and signaled his subordinates to start cleaning the battlefield. The cold and gorgeous sword edge pierced into the neck of the horse gang and cut off the head with a twist and a cut. Regardless of whether the dead horse gang's eyes were open or closed, the commander threw the head into the big bag. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall began to harvest the heads of the horse gang. Although many horse gangs outside the camp died in the first counterattack in the morning, died in the talisman fire, and died in the desperate resistance of the grain team, at this moment, no one would compete with the cavalrymen of Divine Hall for military merits. People in the camp were busy treating the seriously injured, moving the corpses, cleaning up the losses, saving the few remaining provisions, and dispelling the sadness and anger in their hearts. With the broken and scorched cart formation as the dividing line, the inside and outside of the camp were naturally divided into two worlds. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at the ruined camp and the obvious traces of the battle. He imagined the charge of the horse gang and the fierce battle the camp had withstood before the arrival of the reinforcements, and could not help but feel a little admiration. His eyes fell on the wreckage of the carriage in the center of the camp, and his pupils slightly shrank. He did not find the figure of the young talisman master, nor the black shadow. After a moment of silence, he lightly kicked the horse's abdomen and urged the horse to pass through a gap in the cart formation. He came to the back of the disciples of Black Ink Garden who were busy treating the injured, and asked, who is in charge here? Zhuo Zhihua forcefully tied a piece of cloth to the bleeding wound of a civilian's broken arm, and gently lifted the hair coagulated by the blood in front of her forehead. She turned to look at the commander on the horse, but did not answer him. A disciple of Black Ink Garden heard the question and subconsciously looked back at a carriage in the camp. Cat Girl suddenly thought of what Ning Ke had told her before. She handed the medicine in her hand to a senior sister next to her and trotted out of the camp. In addition to the mules and horses, there were 3 carriages in the grain delivery team. Among them, the carriage where the young talisman master was in had been shattered into pieces by the power of the half-divine talisman, while the other 2 carriages were intact. The big black horse was waiting outside one of the carriages, kicking its hooves in boredom. The interior of the carriage was dim. Only when the winter wind of the wilderness lifted a corner of the curtain did the interior become a little brighter. There was a parcel lying quietly on the board of the carriage. Judging from the sunken surface of the board, the parcel was obviously not as heavy as it was. Ning Ke reached out to wipe off the blood oozing out of his mouth and nose. He then reached into the basin beside him and washed it with clean water. Then, he took a small copper box and opened it. Looking at the shabby things in the box, he could not help but shake his head. "You're a girl, why do you only have so little makeup?" "It's not mine, it's theirs." Mo Shanshan, who was sitting on the opposite side, looked at Ning Ke attentively. It seemed that only by concentrating could she make her unfocused and indifferent eyes fall on his face. At this time, there was some doubt in her eyes. "As far as I know, girls in the Great River Kingdom attach great importance to makeup. Last year, there was a popular eyebrow-raising makeup in Chang'an City. I heard that it was spread from your country. Why don't you people care about it?" Ning Ke lowered his head to grind the powder. His movements seemed very skillful and experienced. "Cultivators don't need to care about makeup." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly. Seeing that he didn't want to discuss this issue, her black and beautiful eyebrows slowly furrowed. She asked, "Why do you need makeup?" Ning Ke raised his head and reached out to lift the hair in front of her forehead. His fingers moved casually and combed the waterfall-like black hair into shape. Then, he picked up a very delicate wooden hairpin beside him and pinned it. "Because we need you to be very energetic now." He concentrated on picking the thickness of the rouge and casually explained, "The guys in the Divine Hall are all psychopaths. Although they are shameless, they won't go crazy at any time and place. But no one knows whether they will do something crazier to prevent their shamelessness from being spread." Ning Ke picked up a touch of rouge with his fingernail, thinned it, and then dipped it into a pure white cotton handkerchief specially found. He motioned the young talisman master to raise her face and said, "The only thing we can use to deter them now is you. So, you have to be energetic and can't be as weak as you are now. It seems that you will die at any time. What's the relationship between the two?" Mo Shanshan asked seriously. "Although you are known as the calligraphy addict and can deter those cavalrymen of Divine Hall, if you are too weak, it is easy to stimulate the madness of some psychopaths. Once they go crazy, they will not care whether you are one of the 3 addicts or the last disciple of the master of calligrapher Wang. I know this psychological factor is difficult to explain. You only need to know that many life-and-death fights in the world are often just because someone glanced at someone." Ning Ke guessed the real identity of Mo Shanshan from the shore of the Blue Lake in winter to the blood-soaked battle with her in the wilderness. It was also the first time that he made it clear in his words. There was only one young talisman master in the world who could draw half-divine talisman. Because there was only one calligraphy addict in the world. Mo Shanshan had been apprenticed to the master of calligrapher in Mogan Mountain since she was a child. She had been obsessed with calligraphy and talisman for more than 10 years and did not have much experience in the secular world. Facing Ning Ke, who had been killing people to survive since he was a child, she naturally felt that she could learn a lot. No one knew whether she understood Ning Ke's words or not. Anyway, she obediently raised her face. Her face was very small with slightly puffed cheeks and picturesque eyebrows. Although she was pale and haggard at the moment, she was still beautiful. Ning Ke held the small square handkerchief dipped in rouge and looked at the small face close to him. He was stunned for a moment and then smiled. 2 years ago, he was still killing horse gang, gambling, drinking and bullying Sang Sang in the city of Wei. He never thought that one day he would be in the same carriage with the calligraphy addict, one of the 3 addicts in the world, and that she would be so obedient and let him do whatever he wanted. He rubbed the rouge on her face with his fingers and it gradually dispersed. It was neither heavy nor light makeup. Mo Shanshan's pale face gradually became ruddy under his fingers. It felt good to rub the girl's face with his fingers, especially her slightly puffed cheeks, which were soft and tender. Mo Shanshan sat quietly with her head slightly lowered, letting him rub on her face with her eyelashes slightly trembling. Soon the makeup was finished. The girl's pale and haggard face looked fresh and beautiful, and the blush looked very real. Ning Ke wondered when his craftsmanship had become so good. Then he was going to draw her eyebrows, but he noticed that her eyebrows were thin and black, just as beautiful as the painting. After thinking for a moment, he finally put down the charcoal pen gently. "Do you often do these things?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly asked. Ning Ke thought of his home life after he entered Chang'an City and became a rich man. He thought of the large pile of rouge and powder of Chenjinji cosmetics store hidden on the bed in the old brush pen shop. He smiled gently and said, "I have a little girl at home, so I do these things a lot." Mo Shanshan's long and sparse eyelashes blinked, and she did not continue to ask anything. She turned around and lifted the curtain to look outside. Her cheeks that had just become ruddy became paler again. People in the camp were carrying the bodies of the dead and collecting wood. It seemed that they were going to cremate the dead. At the periphery of the camp, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had almost finished harvesting the heads of the horse gang. The black and gold patterned armor of light was stained with blood, and the sacks were bulging with numerous heads. The Central Plains Coalition Army entered the wilderness to assist Yan Kingdom under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. Except for the Tang Army on the western battlefront, the eastern battlefront was determined by the heads. Today, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had harvested at least more than 300 heads, which was naturally a great achievement. Logically speaking, this achievement should mainly belong to the disciples of the Black Ink Garden and the soldiers and civilians of the Yan Kingdom. However, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall unscrupulously snatched the achievement. Although Mo Shanshan did not care about it, she could clearly feel that the people in the camp who were silently preparing for the cremation were becoming more and more sad and angry. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at the young talisman master who lifted the curtain and noticed that she was in good spirits. He could not help but secretly shiver, thinking that this girl had just taken a great risk to forcibly use the divine talisman across the state. He did not expect that she could recover in such a short time. She really deserved to be one of the 3 addicts in the world who were as famous as the priest. It turns out that Hill Master is in charge here. I didn't know it before, so the rescue came late. Please forgive me, Hill Master. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked calm. In one sentence, he forgot that he did not take any action and coldly watched the camp being attacked. He bowed with hands folded in front to show rare respect to the calligraphy addict Mo Shanshan, and then said, "Miss is in the carriage on the meadow now. She asked me to invite Hill Master to meet her." The papal guardians of the Western Church were directly managed by the judicial department. If the miss he mentioned was not the Tao addict Yi Hongyu, it must be the flower addict. Mo Shanshan was very clear about this, and she knew that the flower addict was above the meadow. The Black Ink Garden is ordered by the Divine Hall to escort the provisions into the palace. It is our duty and we dare not to leave. Mo Shanshan looked at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and said. The commander smiled slightly and said, "Miss and Hill Master have not seen each other for several years. She hopes to see you again." These words were said peacefully with affection, but indifferently revealed a hint of toughness. Mo Shanshan looked at him expressionlessly and said, "If she really wanted to see me, she could have come down from the meadow to see me. Since she did not see me before, there is no need to see me now." These words were said calmly with a hint of sarcasm, but it did not conceal the toughness. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall looked at her silently and suddenly said, "Hill Master's words seem a little unreasonable." Mo Shanshan said, "Do you mean that the Divine Hall now also thinks that thieves are reasonable?" The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly changed his expression and felt humiliated. He looked at her and those disciples of Black Ink Garden who were holding swords in front of the horse and said coldly, "How dare you compare the Divine Hall with thieves? So disrespectful. Do you want the judicial department to ask the sage of calligrapher how he teaches his disciple?" Mo Shanshan calmly replied, "I will wait for the great divine priest of judgment's words on behalf of my teacher." The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall clearly guessed that the calligraphy addict should be forcing herself to be spirited at this time, but he did not dare to offend her at will. He stared at the young talisman master's eyes and suddenly said, "Hill Master has been ordered by the Divine Hall to transport provisions into the palace. This matter is related to the peace negotiation between the two sides. Now the provisions have been destroyed. I don't know how you will explain to the Divine Hall and the coalition army. If the peace negotiation between the two sides is broken because of this, I don't know whether you can bear the responsibility. How to explain to the Divine Hall and the coalition army is my business. It has nothing to do with you." Mo Shanshan slightly blinked her eyelashes and softly said, "Even if I don't explain, you can't kill me here." She raised her head and quietly looked at the eyes of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall, saying, "Or kill all the people here." The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall slightly frowned. Mo Shanshan gently smoothed the hair that was blown to her cheeks by the wind to the back of her shoulders and calmly said, "Since you won't kill all of us, then what are you still doing here? Put down the padeos and go." The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall was silent for a long time. He casually threw the two padeos on the saddle to the ground and looked at her with a slight smile, saying, "I hope to see Hill Master again in the palace." Cat Girl sheathed her sword and pushed away the cavalryman of Divine Hall in front of her. She rushed to the commander's horse and picked up the two padeos. She tightly held them in her arms like treasures and stared at him vigilantly. Mo Shanshan did not respond to the invitation or threat of the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall. She directly turned around and walked back to the camp. In the wilderness in the deep winter, the sun appeared along the low southern sky and soon disappeared. The battle started in the early morning. When the battlefield was cleaned up, it was almost dusk and the light became dim. The dense sound of horse hooves above the meadow sounded like thunder and then gradually became lower. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted Aunt Cuny Maddie of Ueluan Kingdom, the girl in the carriage, and people from the Revelation Institute and the White Tower Temple. The blood-like dusk shrouded the camp, making the bloodstains on the ground and carriage boards even more dazzling. Broken carriage boards, carriage fragments, and hay were piled up together and seemed to be burning in the sunset. After a while, these things were really ignited. The fire became bigger in an instant with the help of the wind in the wilderness and gradually swallowed the bodies of the victims piled up on it. In the crackling sound, one could vaguely see the melted, scorched, and deformed bodies, which made people feel extremely confused and complicated. The air began to fill with a terrible and disgusting burnt smell. The survivors around the cremation ground lowered their heads and began to chant the reincarnation order from the Hautian Taoism song in unison. The monotonous syllables kept repeating, praying that the souls in the flame could smoothly return to the embrace of Hautian. The somewhat messy voice at first became more and more orderly, low, and full of compassion. Ning Ke did not get off the carriage because he was seriously injured. He lifted the curtain and silently looked at the flame in the distance, listening to the chanting and prayers of the people. Suddenly, he raised his head and looked at the high and distant sky above his head. The sky in the wilderness was as clean as he was familiar with. But at this time, under the light of the sunset, it naturally divided into two different worlds. The near-night side was as blue as the sea, while the near-day side was burning like fire. He could not explain why he came to this world. In his childhood in Chang'an, he had been exposed to the faith of Haotian. His master, Master Yen Sei, was a minister of offerings in the South School of Haotian and a great divine priest with a seat in the West Hill Divine Palace. So he naturally believed in Haotian like most people in the world. However, at this moment, in front of the countless souls in the flame, under the sea and fiery sky, his view of the world was gradually changing uncontrollably. People set up camp again in the meadow and spent a long and cold night. The next morning, dozens of surviving cavalrymen of Yen Kingdom returned to the south with the wounded. They were the direct descendants of Crown Prince Chongming and knew very well why the cavalrymen of Divine Hall had such an attitude when they were attacked yesterday. They also knew that even if they went to the palace, they would not get any justice at all, and even had a great risk of being punished by the Divine Hall. So naturally, they chose to return. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom did not go south with the cavalrymen of Yen Kingdom. Instead, they took 2 carriages and several horses and set off again, heading northeast to the left tent palace. Looking at the desolate scenery and the remaining snow in the sparse grass outside the window, Ning Ke coughed twice and took out the handkerchief prepared by Sang Sang. He wiped the blood on the corner of his mouth and turned to look at the girl in white opposite him. He asked, "Why do you want to go to the palace?" "The matter of the grain team needs an explanation," and Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyelashes and trembled slightly. After a long silence, she said, "I am very angry." Ning Ke looked at her and smiled. He said, "I find that I kind of like you. The task was completed on Thursday. I almost vomited from writing so much. There are still 3 days left. Oh my God, my dear ones, if you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 224. Hearing this, the young talisman master lowered her head and looked at the white dress on her knees. It seemed that the lace there was very beautiful, but in fact, the white dress was plain with nothing on it. The horse carriage was still moving forward. The wind in the wilderness lifted the curtain, and the morning sunshine shone in. The morning sunshine shone on the plain black and white decoration in the carriage, and on her black hair and white face, separating out a few wisps of light and shadow. A calm and affirmative voice slowly came from her lips. "I think, I already have someone I like." The morning sunshine also fell on Ning Quebec. He did not expect that his habitual way of speaking would cause the other party to misunderstand. He smiled awkwardly, and his smile looked very gentle in the morning sunshine. "I have a lot of people I like. Like is a common phrase that I use to express my kindness. I hope it won't make you feel too abrupt." The wilderness ground was blown dry and hard by the cold wind, and the wheels on it shook from time to time. The horse carriage was not big, and the two sat opposite each other. With the rise and fall of the carriage, their knees almost touched each other. Ning Ke moved back and leaned against the cotton cushion by the window. His sore body finally found a support point, and he could not help but let out a comfortable sigh. Looking at the beautiful face of the young girl close at hand, he said, "This is what the world is like. You don't need to be unhappy about those disgusting things." Yesterday, he helped Mo Shanshan make up and tied her waterfall-like black hair at the back. When she woke up this morning, Mo Shanshan still maintained this hairstyle. He did not know whether she did not care about it, or she thought Ning Ke's craftsmanship was really good. So when she habitually combed the hair in front of her forehead, her slender fingers missed. She very seriously asked, "Joy and hate are all emotions. How can you suppress them?" Ning Ke leaned against the window, and his eyes were slightly squinted by the dazzling morning sunshine from the corner of the curtain. After a moment of silence, he said, "I don't mean to suppress this kind of emotion, but to not be affected by this kind of emotion. Being angry is to punish yourself with other people's mistakes. It is not worthwhile. Mo Shanshan slowly frowned and persistently asked, but being angry is being angry. Looking at her eyebrows, Ning Ke suddenly had an impulse to touch them with his fingers. He withdrew his hands into his sleeves and said, "Since you are angry, of course you should vent your anger as soon as possible. So I support you to go to the palace. But have you thought clearly, once you meet the cavalrymen of Divine Hall or those nobles in the palace, what should you do?" Mo Shanshan shook her head expressionlessly. She just intuitively thought that she should go to the palace to find the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and those people on the meadow, and seek justice for the dead Yan Kingdom's soldiers and soldiers. Ning Ke seemed to have guessed what she was thinking. He looked at her and said seriously, "There is no such thing as justice. Even if you are powerful enough, you may not be able to get it back. So venting your anger has nothing to do with justice, but fairness. King Yen, Man Yu. If others hit us, we will hit them. If others curse us, we will hit them. If others want to kill us, we will kill them first." Mo Shanshan opened her eyes and looked at him. It seemed that she did not expect that many things from his mouth would become so simple and presumptuous. She slightly frowned and asked, "You Tangs, do you all see things like this?" "Almost." Ning Ke said with a smile, "We have been receiving this kind of education since we were born." Mo Shanshan reached out to lift the curtain of the window beside her. She looked at the desolate scenery of the wilderness gradually retreating, looked at the few lonely birds in the distant sky, and thought of the people in the horse carriage on the meadow yesterday. After a moment of silence, she said, "What if I can't kill those people when I arrive at the palace?" Naturally, the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the nobles they protected could not be killed easily, even if she was the well-known calligraphy addict. Ning Ke looked at her confused expression and vaguely guessed that those people on the meadow might be of extremely high status. Who were those people on the meadow yesterday? Mo Shanshan turned her head and looked at him. She softly said, "The students of the Revelation Institute and the monks of the White Tower Temple. If you want to ask the person in the horse carriage, she is the princess of the Yueluan Kingdom and also the favorite of the Revelation Institute." Ning Ke's frown gradually relaxed. The change in his expression did not mean that he was relaxed. Instead, it showed that he was a little surprised. He said, "The flower addict Lu Qinjia? What is the legendary wonderful person doing in the wilderness?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly smiled. Her originally stiff expression suddenly became lively because of this rare smile. Especially the undisciplined and cold gaze in her eyes, it actually became a bit cuter in an instant. "You don't know that Mo Shanshan is the calligraphy addict, but you know the name of the flower addict." Ning Ke smiled. He thought that if it was the flower addict, it would be wishful thinking for them to go to the palace to seek justice. After his smile gradually faded, he looked at Mo Shanshan and said, "You can't kill people, but you want to vent your anger. Perhaps I can give you some ideas. What does the flower addict Lu Qinjia like or value the most?" "She is called the flower addict. Her favorite and most cherished thing is naturally flowers." Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Ke's face as if she was looking at an idiot. She said, "Other than that, everyone knows that she is crazy about Prince Long Qing. In fact, she is a very virtuous person." Ning Ke thought for a moment and said, "Venting anger is nothing more than bullying people. If you want to go to the palace to vent your anger, then you can directly start with flowers and virtuousness." Then, he began to seriously plan for Mo Shanshan. Once they met Lu Qinjia in the palace, what kind of method should be used to appease the anger of the disciples of Black Ink Garden and how to avoid causing too much of a commotion. Mo Shanshan's brows furrowed slightly as she listened to these seemingly childish yet sinister ideas when she thought about it carefully. She looked at Ning Ke's smiling face under the morning light. She looked at his fresh little dimples and suddenly felt that his smile was so hateful and so cute at the same time. Bullying people was Ning Ke's favorite thing to do. Bullying the strong as the weak was something he loved more than making love. He thought to himself that he had already bullied Prince Longqing once in advance. He did not know what the flower addict would think of him if she knew. Just as he was thinking excitedly, he suddenly realized that Mo Shanshan was looking at him attentively from the corner of his eyes. Only then did he realize that he had gotten carried away and could not help but smile awkwardly. Ning Ke asked, "Are you very familiar with the flower addict?" At this time, Mo Shanshan was grinding ink and laying paper. In order to keep a distance from Ning Ke, she leaned as far as possible towards the window. She answered, "She once went to Mogan Mountain a few years ago. I spent dozens of days with her." Ning Ke leaned against the carriage and looked up at the plain decorations in the carriage. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What kind of person is the flower addict? Is she very beautiful? Is she really as crazy about flowers as the rumors say?" Mo Shanshan's right hand holding the pen slightly paused. She turned back to look at him and said, "Are you very interested in her?" Ning Ke said with a smile, "I'm really curious about what Prince Longqing's fiancée looks like. Because I've always been curious. Is there any woman in this world who doesn't feel inferior when facing Prince Longqing's perfect face?" Mo Shanshan gently put the pen on the shelf and turned around with her hand on the ground. She slightly tilted her head to look at him and asked, "Have you seen Prince Longqing?" "Even if I haven't seen him, I've heard of him. Everyone knows that His Highness is the most beautiful man in the world." After saying this, Ning Ke found that the young talisman master was still staring at him. He knew that she did not believe this statement, so he had to raise his hands in surrender and said with a smile, "Well, I admit that I have seen him." Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly. No one knew what she was thinking about. Her eyes, which were as calm as the autumn lake, suddenly became bright for a moment. Her lips slightly moved as if she wanted to ask something, but in the end, she did not ask. She seemed to be a little flustered. Perhaps to cover up the previous moment of panic, she slightly bowed her head and slightly blinked her eyelashes. She sat down again with her hands on her knees and said another thing. "You once analyzed that the target of those horse gangs should be me instead of the provisions. But in fact, their target should be you." She raised her head and looked at Ning Ke, as if she was looking at the scenery of the wilderness outside the window behind Ning Quebec. She seriously said, "I clearly saw the scene behind the wall of fire. They came prepared and just wanted to kill you." Ning Ke did not ask the question that he did not ask. He knew that she had long suspected his identity, but she did not ask directly, which made him feel a little grateful. But at this time, he was still hesitating when to tell the girls of the Great River Kingdom about his true identity and did not know how to answer. Speaking of the fire wall in the battle yesterday, he remembered the horrible hole that the half-divine talisman hit on the wall of fire. He said, "At that time, I thought that was the last sky-burning fire talisman you could display. After that, your psyche power was exhausted and you could not even display the simplest talisman Taoism. I did not expect that you still had such a trick." Mo Shanshan suddenly leaned forward and very seriously bowed to him. She softly said, "Senior brother, I have to thank you for teaching me how to fight the day before yesterday." "Shanshan thanks you here." Ning Ke was startled. He remembered that he had severely reprimanded her a few days ago, saying that she was soft-hearted and that she did not know how to fight at all and did not know to save the most powerful power for the most critical moment. At that time, he did not completely guess her identity. At this time, thinking that he was actually teaching the calligraphy addict how to fight, he could not help but feel a little emotional. "In any case, we could survive because of your half-divine talisman." At that time, he was in a critical situation and did not have a clear feeling about the earth-shattering divine talisman. But after thinking about it carefully last night, he increasingly felt that the girl talisman master opposite him was amazing. It was not a big deal to challenge someone in the 5 states of cultivation. As Chen Pipi said, with his cultivation aptitude, even if he entered the knowing destiny state, he would be the weakest one in the history. If there was no other means, any powerhouse in the see-through state could try to challenge or even kill him. But states were states. Mo Shanshan was obviously still in the see-through state, but she could display the infinitive talisman that only divine talisman masters could display. This fact deeply shocked and puzzled Ning. Quebec Master Yen Sei concluded that he was a rare genius in talisman Taoism in the world. However, looking at the girl in white who was quietly sitting on her knees in front of him and her beautiful face which was neither angry nor happy, Ning Ke rarely had a lack of confidence. Master, did you choose me because you already knew that the most talented successor of talisman Taoism in the world was taken away by the master of calligrapher? But in this way, I feel very embarrassed. Of course, Mo Shanshan could not guess Ning Ke's psychological activities at this time, and she did not know that he was silently criticizing a respected divine talisman master and feeling sorry for himself. She put her hands together and bowed, asking seriously, "Senior brother Zhong." Ning Ke woke up and corrected her seriously. "I said, you can call me 13. Mo Shanshan was stunned and felt that this title was a little awkward. After hesitating for a moment, she said bitterly, 13. Senior brother, I want to ask you something. Seeing her serious and solemn, Ning Ke did not know what she wanted to say. He calmed himself down and saluted back, saying, please go ahead. Mo Shanshan said, I have been cultivating talisman Taoism with my master since I was a child. I have been in contact with books and talismans for more than 10 years. I want to ask you to teach me how to fight with me and how to win. Looking at her serious expression, Ning Ke knew that yesterday's battle must have impacted this young talisman master's view of the world. She had been famous for a long time, so she made this request. In terms of cultivation state, he knew that he was mediocre. Compared with his senior brothers and sisters in the back mountain, Prince Long Qing and the young talisman master opposite him, he was not worth mentioning at all. But when it came to fighting, he had been struggling between life and death since he was a child, dancing on the edge of the blade. His whole life was continuous fighting, so he was extremely confident. Fighting is a very simple thing. It is how to make the opponent lose the ability to hurt you under the premise of protecting yourself. So we must first know what kind of strength we have and what kind of strength the enemy has. Ning Ke pointed at the carriage roof above their heads and said, we must first know how high the roof is from the floor to the roof, and then know how high we are. Only then can we know whether we will hit our head when we stand up. Of course, we may break the roof of the carriage, but I think not many people are willing to use their head to measure the hardness of the roof. It was a very simple language and a very shallow metaphor, but it could be described more clearly than the preparation work before a fight. When Mo Shanshan was thinking, her eyes became more unfocused and indifferent, and no one knew where she was looking. She murmured softly, how to judge that the opponent has lost the ability to hurt himself? Ning Ke liked to answer this seemingly stupid but actually very important question. He leaned against the cotton cushion beside the window, raised his hand in the air and answered, breaking the arms or legs is the most common way to seriously injure someone. But if you need to make sure that the opponent has lost all the fighting power, remember one sentence, only the dead are safe. Hearing this, Mo Shanshan looked a little confused, as if she didn't understand why Ning Ke always put death at the forefront when it came to fighting. She had been taught by Mr. Mo Chi since she was a child that the fight between cultivators didn't necessarily have to be about life and death. Ning Ke looked at her expression and realized that this calligraphy addict was really a pure white lotus flower born in the ink lake. Before coming to the wilderness, she didn't know the sufferings of the world at all. He couldn't help saying earnestly, if you cultivate in the ink lake, of course you don't need to think about these problems. Just like me, if I hide in the academy to study, I only need to play chess, forge iron, and listen to music every day. I don't know how happy my life would be. But the world outside the small building is full of wind, frost, snow, and rain. Since you have stepped into it, you have to understand how dangerous it is. Mo Shanshan heard his sincere words and nodded to show that she was enlightened. At the same time, she looked at him gratefully. Unfortunately, her eyes were still so unfocused that Ning Ke couldn't feel her gratitude clearly. 13th brother, if the opponent's strength and state are far beyond yours, how can you defeat him? Hill Master, 13th brother, you can call me by my name. If the ordinary people in the world know this, they will inevitably think that I am too disrespectful. Then please call me younger sister Shanshan. Younger sister Shanshan, the question you asked just now, is basically unsolvable. If anyone can answer this question perfectly, then he will be the most powerful person in the world, because he has ways to defeat those who are more powerful than him. Mo Shanshan frowned slightly. After a long time of silence, she asked seriously, Senior brother, are you being sarcastic? Ning Ke looked at her blankly. From the side of the blue lake, he found a fact that made him feel a little uncomfortable. Finally, there was someone in the world who could defeat him countless times. Younger sister, you can think of it as sarcasm. But please don't think too much about it. The sarcasm in my speech is often to deepen the impression of the listener, because this matter is very important. Mo Shanshan nodded and continued to ask, then how can we defeat enemies who are far more powerful than us? Ning Ke answered seriously, when facing enemies who are far more powerful than us, I insist that we only have one choice. Mo Shanshan raised her small face slightly and asked with expectation, what choice? Ning Ke said, escape. Don't be speechless. Escape is also a kind of battle. When facing opponents who are far more powerful than us, even if you want to escape, you may not succeed. If you want, I can start teaching you from the beginning of escape. Senior brother, it is indeed a very good character to think about failure before talking about victory. But I still want to learn how to win first. Mo Shanshan sat on a small table by the window, holding an ink brush in her hand, ready to take notes carefully. Ning Ke looked at this scene and could not help but feel a little proud. He could not help but think of last spring, when he was on the horse carriage returning from the wilderness. He used to take down every word of old Master Liu with an ink brush on a piece of paper just like her. He felt a lot of complicated emotions, and after calming down a little, he said seriously, you are right. Among the younger generation in the world, there are not many people who can surpass you in cultivation state. I believe that in most cases, the opponents you face, like the horse gang yesterday, are far weaker than you. He said seriously, when facing an opponent who is weaker than you can't have sympathy, can't have arrogance, and can't see the opponent as a weak person. Instead, you have to treat the opponent as the most powerful enemy. But you must remember that you can't look down on the opponent in terms of fighting spirit, and you should have a choice in tactics. When facing a strong opponent who is weak, it is like a fierce tiger pouncing on a rabbit. A fierce tiger's full strength does not really transfer all its strength to its palms, and then kill the weak rabbit. Instead, it focuses on the mind, and does not give the weak rabbit any chance to escape. Pouncing on the rabbit and killing it avoids the tiredness of chasing, entanglement, and can save energy. If the tiger appears, even hundreds of rabbits will not dare to move. Mo Shanshan remembered these words, raised her head, looked at him, and asked, what if two tigers meet? Ning Ke said, pretend to be injured and beg for mercy, saying that I have silently loved you for 10,000 years, and do everything possible to weaken your opponent's will, like beating his mother, killing his family, and slapping his son, and do everything possible to provoke him and make him lose his mind. If you wear shoes, go to the thorny land, if you wear thick clothes, choose the bitter cold land, and do everything possible to create a suitable fighting background for you. If the opponent is strong, you will fight with the tip of your claws, and cut his skin to make him bleed. If the opponent's claws are strong, you will wait quietly, and let him injure you slightly. Then you will find an opportunity to enter a desperate situation, and do everything possible to hide your weakness and take the lead. Mo Shanshan listened to him talking about all kinds of situations, and her eyes became more and more unfocused. She subconsciously muttered to herself, it sounds very troublesome. Where can I find so many ways? If all the methods don't work, then you only need to remember the last one. Ning Ke looked at her and said seriously, when two tigers meet, the brave one wins. Mo Shanshan opened her eyes and looked at him seriously. After a long time of silence, she completely understood the meaning of these words, and said softly with emotion, "Senior brother, you really know a lot of things." Ning Ke always felt that her focused eyes seemed to be focused on something else. Hearing this praise, he could not help but feel a little strange, and said, "Younger sister, you have countless admirers in the world, and I can't stand being praised by you so often." Mo Shanshan frowned and asked confusedly, "Senior brother, why do you know so many things?" Ning Ke adjusted his sitting posture and said with a smile, "The master of the academy once taught us that true knowledge comes from practice. Younger sister, if you had been fighting since you were a child like me, then you would naturally know so many things." Mo Shanshan's expression became more and more dull. "Senior brother, you have fought so many battles. Were you very naughty when you were a child?" Ning Ke's body was slightly stiff, and he felt that it was really hard to talk to this white lotus of black ink garden. Mo Shanshan asked, "Senior brother?" Ning Ke waved his hand tiredly and said, "Younger sister, I also have a question to ask you." Mo Shanshan asked, "What is it?" Ning Ke looked at her eyes and asked, "Why do you never look me in the eye?" Mo Shanshan looked at him and asked confusedly, "When did I?" Ning Ke felt that she was looking at the wilderness outside the window, and sighed, "Anytime and anywhere, such as now." Mo Shanshan suddenly thought of something, and her expression became slightly stiff. After a moment of silence, she explained softly, "I have loved calligraphy since childhood, and I have copied too many calligraphy sections, so my eyes are not very good." Ning Ke slightly opened his mouth, and did not know what to say. Only then did he know that the world-famous calligraphy addict turned out to be short-sighted, and from her eyes, could it be that there was some astigmatism? "I gradually found that I have always had the complex of being at the bottom of a dry well, but my mind has never been clearer in this book, and my plan will not be disturbed by many things." It is said that the story and characters written by the writer will sometimes become more powerful than the writer, but it will not happen at night, because I clearly know where the powerful thing is. I love it. There is still one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for it. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 225. Ning Ke and the disciples of Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom had been familiar with each other since they helped each other by the Blue Waste Sea and hunted together in the wilderness. After fighting side by side in the meadow, they were even more intimate. In the following days, Ning Ke stayed in the horse carriage to heal his wounds. At the same time, he reformed the Talisman Master's worldview, outlook on life, and outlook on fighting again. He seldom got off the horse carriage and even ate and took a break in the carriage. In the eyes of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, they inevitably felt a little strange. They were very clear that the Hill Master's temperament seemed to be indifferent, but in fact, she was mild and gentle. But she had never been so close to a young man. Zhuo Zhihua also felt it was very inappropriate. But thinking that Ning Ke was seriously injured, she felt embarrassed to let him get off the horse carriage. In fact, Ning Ke's injury recovered very quickly. He no longer coughed blood on the second night. His sense of perception, which had been severely shaken, also gradually subsided. The occasional dizziness did not appear again. Zhuo Zhihua and other disciples of Black Ink Garden were not very clear about his physical condition. But Mo Shanshan saw the whole process of his recovery and inevitably felt a little puzzled. That night when Ning Ke drew his bow and killed several horse gang members, Mo Shanshan felt the fluctuation of psyche power. At that time, she guessed that Ning Ke should be a cultivator. She was not so surprised about this. The academy, which was a wonderful place, chose students to go to the wilderness alone to perform tasks, so the students were naturally extraordinary. But the horse gang leader was a psyche master who had entered the upper state of see-through. If she had not understood the half-divine talisman in Mogan Mountain in spring, she could not have hurt him. Such a powerful psyche master attacked Ning Ke with all her strength. According to common sense, even if Ning Ke could survive, his sense of perception would be seriously damaged and it was very likely that he would become an idiot. How could he talk with confidence and fluency like now? Was Ning Ke's psyche power stronger than hers? The calligraphy addict was not good at talking with people, especially unwilling to pry into other people's privacy. So she had many doubts about Ning Ke, but she did not ask any questions. She just sat quietly by the window and used graceful small regular script to remember Ning Ke's instructions. Then she carefully chose what she could learn and tried to understand it. Ning Ke couldn't help praising her calligraphy, because Mo Shanshan's calligraphy was indeed excellent. The brush strokes were round but not coquettish, soft but firm, and the strokes were faintly discernible and clear. The thickness was appropriate and fresh. At this moment, he finally understood why the female disciples of Black Ink Garden laughed so happily when he praised that the female talisman master's calligraphy obsession was similar to his own style in the camp a few days ago. The calligraphy addict was obsessed with books. The books here were the books of the world, not the books of reading and writing thousands of books. In the eyes of the disciples of Black Ink Garden, it was really ridiculous for an ordinary person to say that the calligraphy addict in the world was similar to his own style. The disciples of the Black Ink Garden rode on horses and took a turn at a certain ice jam. From the northeast to the northwest, they went straight to the palace. Along the way, they saw few people, mostly cold-tolerant Kashmir sheep and wasteland. The road was still difficult to travel. The carriage kept undulating and shaking. Ning Ke looked at her still wrist hanging the brush by the window, and the handwriting on the paper was not messy at all. He could not help but sigh with emotion. His reputation as a talisman Taoism genius was not so real in front of this girl. Would even his reputation as a calligraphy master be taken away? He placed the cotton pad behind the carriage and lay down comfortably. His face was very close to Mo Shanshan's white dress. He casually pulled out a piece of paper from the stack on the small table. When his eyes fell on it, he couldn't help but be slightly startled. There were some familiar words written on the paper. Young Master Sang, I'm drunk today, so I won't. When he saw the young talisman master writing quietly by the window, Ning Ke thought of third sister by the east window of the old library. He began to miss the academy in the south of Chang'an City, the days in the back mountain and those lovely fellow disciples. At this time, he suddenly saw his chicken soup calligraphy in the wilderness thousands of miles away. He began to miss the alley in the eastern city of Chang'an, the days in the old brush pen shop and the dark and thin guy. Mo Shanshan noticed his strange expression. She turned her body with her hands on the ground and found that he was looking at the chicken soup calligraphy she bought with a lot of money. She could not help asking, 13th brother, do you also know calligraphy? It must be said that the calligraphy addict was not good at communicating with people. If it was someone else who asked, they would probably say, senior brother, do you also like calligraphy? But she was direct and did not think about the listener's feelings at all. Ning Ke had long been used to her talking about things like second brother's ancient crown from time to time. He did not care about it at all. He shrugged and answered, a little. Mo Shanshan once asked him if he also knew talisman Taoism. At that time, his answer was a little. Now that they talked about calligraphy, his answer was still a little. In front of others, he might have the confidence to say that he was a genius in talisman Taoism and a calligraphy master. But in front of the calligraphy addict, he felt that it was better to keep a low profile to avoid losing face. Mo Shanshan looked at him and suddenly asked, what do you think of this calligraphy? She looked very focused and seemed to pay attention to Ning Ke's answer. Ning Ke did not expect that she would ask for his opinion. He said in surprise, you mean the chicken soup calligraphy? Mo Shanshan looked at him and said seriously, senior brother is a student of the Chang An Academy. Of course, you have heard of the chicken soup calligraphy. I heard that this calligraphy is a masterpiece of the Academy, so I want to hear your opinion. There was a common saying that it was always difficult to know oneself. But it was also difficult to comment on oneself, especially in the case that the listener did not know, if you still wanted to praise yourself. Ning Ke hid his true identity from the disciples of Black Ink Garden. Although he did not have any malice, they were so close now. Once he was exposed, it would inevitably be a little embarrassing. Therefore, he had to continue to hide it until there was no suitable opportunity. At this time, facing such a situation, it was even more embarrassing. Moreover, he did not know what the young talisman master thought of the chicken soup calligraphy and him who wrote it. If she liked to appreciate it, it would be fine. But if she hated his calligraphy, wouldn't it be very troublesome? This possibility was not small. Although there was a saying that there was no first place in literature, in fact, people like Mo Shanshan, who was good at calligraphy, would always be somewhat disapproving of other calligraphers according to the conflicts that had occurred in the gatherings of poets and calligraphers in Chang'an. Scholars despise each other, so is it not between calligraphers? The tip of the brush of this calligraphy is exposed but not restrained. The form is scattered and the spirit is dead without a bone. It seems to be innovative, but in fact, it is just some chicken tricks. It is evil and lacks the style of righteousness and elegance. It is not worth mentioning. He did not hesitate to belittle the chicken soup calligraphy. His expression was calm, and he hid all the embarrassment and bitterness in his body. He did not dare to show any of it. This might be the so-called price. Mo Shanshan looked at him quietly, as if trying to discern whether he was speaking the truth or just casually belittling her. After a long time, she asked seriously again, "Then what does senior brother think of the blooming flower calligraphy?" Ning Ke looked at her and said with slight surprise, "Younger sister, you have even read the flower blooms calligraphy?" Mo Shanshan shook her head and said, "I have collected some copies of the calligrapher of the Academy. But the flower blooms calligraphy is hidden in the deep palace. Even the copies are also collected by the mansions of the princes and dukes in Chang'an. Therefore, I have only heard of its name but not seen it." Ning Ke felt slightly relaxed and replied with a smile, "I have not seen it either, so I can't comment." Mo Shanshan slightly lowered her eyes and fell on the rubbing of the chicken soup calligraphy in his hand. No one knew what she was thinking. She only sighed softly and turned to continue writing her hairpin-style small regular script. In the battle under the meadow that day, she saw the scene on the other side of the wall of fire, but did not see the fleeting fireball in front of the horse gang leader's face. If she knew that Ning Ke beside her was also a person of talisman Taoism, perhaps she would think differently and behave differently at this time. Deep in the wilderness, from the northeast to the northwest, they could see the faint shadow of the mountain in the distance after a short time. Min Mountain was the most magnificent and longest mountain range in the world. It extended from the depths of the wilderness to the south of the Hebei county of the Tang Empire, near Chang'an City. No one knew how many kilometers it stretched, as if it was a sword left by Haotian in the north of the world. In the middle of the wilderness, there was a break in the Min Mountain, which formed a natural canyon. To the west of the canyon, there was a city guarded by the elites of the Tang Empire's North Road Army. It was heavily guarded, and Min Mountain was also divided into two footholds, north and south. The vast Min Mountain where Ning Ke used to live was the southern foothold. The northern foothold of Min Mountain was deep in the wilderness and was called Zashi Mountain by the barbarians, which meant Tianqi Mountain. It meant that if you walked out of this mountain range, you would be abandoned by Haotian. There was a fertile grassland in the east of Tianqi Mountain. The tribe of Chanyu of the left tent had lived on this grassland for generations, and the palace was there. Looking at the shadow of the mountain in the distant sky through the window, Ning Ke naturally thought of Min Mountain in the south, the North Road Army fort on the other side of the mountain, and his old buddies in the city of Wei. He had left the Blue Water Battalion and joined the grain team. He had been walking in the wilderness for many days, but the mountain range was still there, as if it had never changed. Even a horse would die from looking at a mountain, not to mention such a majestic and precipitous continuous mountain range. The palace was close, but it still needed some time to arrive. As the distance was shortened, Ning Ke became more and more silent. He spent more time hiding in the horse carriage and refused to get out. Even when Cat Girl called him to see the white cranes in the wetland, he did not move. Because he needed time to think about two very important issues. The horse gang who attacked them in the meadow had followed them for many days. Later, they had confirmed that the target of the horse gang was him. That meant that the power behind the horse gang had already known that he had left the Blue Water Battalion and joined the grain team. Who were the minions of the horse gang or those groups of horse gang? Who wanted to kill him? Who was the leader of the horse gang? A psyche master in the see-through state could not be a simple leader of the horse gang. Ning Ke felt the aura of a soldier in the battle, which made his heart heavier. The right arm of the leader of the horse gang was cut off by him. If he did not die in the wilderness after being rescued by his subordinates, he must need a place to be treated. Such a serious injury could not be healed by the common horse gang's nest. The man needed doctors and medicine. He had to hurry. And the place closest to the meadow where the broken arm could be healed happened to be the left tent palace. Mo Shanshan insisted on bringing the disciples of the Black Ink Garden to the palace after the provisions were destroyed. Ning Ke did not object. Besides the friendship made in the battle, there was another reason. No matter the person behind the horse gang was the Chanyu of the palace or someone else, he firmly believed that as long as the leader of the horse gang was still alive, there was at least a 90% chance that he was hiding in the palace. He wanted to find him, ask him some questions, and then kill him. In addition, he was also reflecting on what he had done after leaving the academy and coming to the wilderness. Since he was very young, after every difficult battle of life and death, he would analyze and summarize afterwards. That was why he survived with Sang Sang. Reflection had become a kind of instinct for him. However, this reflection in the horse carriage was deeper than all the reflections in the past years. He even traced back to all the actions he had done after leaving the city of Wei and entering Chang'an. After thinking silently for a long time, he confirmed that after leaving the city of Wei, especially after entering the academy, many of his actions or choices were not the most appropriate one, because he had fallen into some kind of misunderstanding. When he was in the city of Wei, he was used to riding alone into the wilderness to spy on the enemy for the general and chase the horse gang with his fellows. So this time, when he brought the students of the academy to the wilderness to practice, he was still used to doing things like this with the two important tasks given by His Majesty and the Nation Master. He disguised himself and mixed into the grain team, thinking only to act secretly. However, he forgot that he was no longer a small soldier in the city of Wei, not a scout, not a woodcutter in Shubi Lake, but a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, a student of the back mountain of the academy, a golden secret agent of His Majesty, and a visiting professor of the South School of Hautian Taoism and the Imperial Center Administration. Doing things secretly meant that his background, which was admired and respected by countless people, was all meaningless. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall knew that Mo Shanshan was the calligraphy addict, so he did not dare to talk nonsense. If he showed his identity as a disciple of the back mountain of the academy, how would the horse gang dare to attack him? There was also a very important point. Before leaving the academy, second brother specially reminded him in the back mountain that people from the academy could only bully others and not be bullied. How arrogant he was. But now he did not have the identity of a disciple of the back mountain of the academy. Even if he was arrogant, who would know that he was from the academy? Ning Ke supported his chin with his hand and leaned against the window of the carriage. He looked at the mountains and the faintly visible tents in the distance and sighed helplessly. A poor boy from the countryside who made a lot of money in the city would only secretly buy some houses and eat a few bowls of hot and sour noodle slice soup. It would take some time for him to get used to bullying others, after all. It was the middle of winter, and the weather was freezing. The grassland at the foot of Tianqi Mountain was covered with green grass in the east and west, maybe because of the geothermal heat in the mountain. The tents were in full bloom in the grassland like white clouds. 2 carriages and a few tired horses carried the disciples of the Black Ink Garden of the Great River Kingdom to the grassland. There was no grain team behind them, nor any cavalry guards. It looked a little sad. The peace talks between the left tent palace of the grassland barbarians and the coalition forces of the Central Plains had officially begun. All forces gathered here with their cavalries. Noisy and lively sounds could be heard from afar. No one knew how many people were drinking and talking. A cavalry of the palace welcomed the disciples of the Black Ink Garden into the camp. Obviously, the news of the attack on the meadow and the half-divine talisman had spread. Some people knew that the calligraphy addict was in the carriage, so the cavalry behaved respectfully. On the contrary, the messengers and guards from the Central Plains in the camp looked at the disciples of the Black Ink Garden coldly. They did not understand why these people did not return to the north of Yan Kingdom when the provisions were destroyed. Chapter 226. A dozen tired horses and dusty carriages could not affect the situation in the wilderness, and the negotiation between the barbarian royal court and the Central Plains coalition army had nothing to do with them. They had been robbed by the horse gang, but they still insisted on coming here. The Black Ink Garden disciples themselves knew that they wanted to seek justice, but in others' eyes, they were forced to come here to wait for the Divine Hall's decision. The future was bleak, so no one would be willing to come here, even if it was said that the calligraphy addict was in that carriage. The grassland by the mountain was boundless. Although tens of thousands of people gathered here in the middle of winter and tents were in full bloom, there was still enough space to accommodate people. To show their sincerity, the royal court agreed to let the Central Plains coalition army choose a place to camp and deploy people. The person in charge of this matter was a manager of the West Hill Divine Palace. After he indifferently greeted Zhuozhihua, he directly led the Black Ink Garden disciples to a place. The 2 tents were not far from the coalition army's central tent, just behind it. However, it seemed a little remote and the terrain was slightly higher. The Black Ink Garden disciples walked into the tents and looked at the pre-prepared equipment. They found that it was not bad, and they knew that the coalition army gave them some face because of the Hill Master. However, from the time they were picked up by the royal court's cavalry to this moment, except for the manager of the Divine Hall, no one from the top of the coalition army or the bigwigs of the Divine Hall showed up. In addition, they saw the indifferent eyes of the people from the Central Plains countries along the way. The Black Ink Garden disciples knew that they were deliberately excluded and forgotten, so they inevitably felt a little depressed. Cat Girl was too young, so naturally, she didn't think too much. She looked at the thick woolen mattress inside the tent and thought that she could finally have a good sleep tonight. She didn't have to squeeze with the mountain master in the narrow carriage, so she seemed a little happy. Ning Ke had experienced being excluded and deliberately forgotten in the academy last year, so he was very used to it and did not care much. He just felt that the location of the camp seemed a little inappropriate. He walked out of the tent and looked into the distance. The big black horse, carrying a heavy luggage, walked to him and gently nudged him with its head. It made an unpleasant sound like bellows, and seemed to be extremely tired. Ning Ke stroked the mane on its neck and scolded it with a smile, "Don't always complain in front of me. It's just a small thing. You don't have to work so hard. We're leaving soon, so don't be in a hurry to unload your luggage. If you're hungry, you can find some grass to eat." When facing many problems and choices, they indeed lacked courage. Even the Hill Master could not change this situation. Where should we move? Ning Ke looked at the grassland. According to the edict of the Divine Hall, all the countries of the Central Plains had sent people to help Yan Kingdom in the war. At least hundreds of thousands of people were gathered on the 2 front lines at the frontier fortress of North Yan Kingdom. However, now that they were deep in the wilderness for peace talks, it was impossible for all the countries to bring all of them. But the cavalries guarding the nobles gathered together, at least 1,000 cavalries. On the grassland under the setting sun, the flags were fluttering. There were not many tents on the grassland in the west, but they were arranged in a very orderly manner. The flags fluttering in the cold wind also looked particularly spirited. As for the faintly visible cavalries, they were much more orderly and solemn than the cavalries of the Central Plains Coalition Army here. People usually thought that the most elite cavalries in the world were the papal guardians of the West Hill Divine Palace. However, the number of cavalries of the Divine Hall was too small. According to the scriptures, the number of cavalries was strictly limited to less than 1,000. Therefore, the truly powerful cavalries that dared to conquer the world were the other two. In the wilderness on the other side of Jianqi Mountain, the palace cavalries under the command of Golden Chanyu and the cavalries of the Tang Empire. Ning Ke pointed to the orderly tents on the west side of the grassland and those familiar military flags. He said, "We will camp there." The disciples of Black Ink Garden recognized that it was the camp of the Tang army. They were slightly startled and agreed to his suggestion after a moment. The Great River Kingdom and the Tang Empire had been on good terms for generations. Now they were all here under the edict of the Divine Hall. They believed that no one would say anything mean to them if they set up camp there. Unfortunately, the inexperienced girls of the Great River Kingdom still did not expect that they would abandon the camp designated by the Divine Hall and choose to live next to the Tang camp. This still attracted many people's attention and caused a lot of criticism. Looking at the dozen tired horses and dusty carriages walking towards the Tang camp in the twilight, the swordsmen from the South Jin Kingdom looked indifferent. The monks of the Yueluan Kingdom looked sarcastic. The manager of the Divine Hall said with a gloomy expression, "If you want to ride on the Tang's coattails, then go ahead. I know that there is no rest today, so I have been riding. But as you all know, it is getting slower and slower. I will do my best. Girls, hug me and give me encouragement. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 227. The wilderness in winter was still cold even with the mountains blocking the wind and hot springs flowing. The palace and the Central Plains country's negotiations had been going on for several days and had entered the most heated stage. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall escorted the nobles here because the Chanyu princess liked flowers very much. Due to the climate of the wilderness, she could not cultivate them properly. Therefore, she wrote a letter to the Divine Hall to let the flower addict Lu Qinjia come to the palace for a while so that she could learn from her. This had nothing to do with the negotiations, but it started when the negotiations were in a deadlock. Just like the food sent by the girls from the Great River Kingdom, it was a secondary exchange of feelings. Both the barbarians, the left king's palace and the Central Plains countries did not want the war to continue. The reason for the plundering and the subsequent conflicts was because of the desolate man's return to the south. The former was a problem of resources, the latter was a problem of attitude. The so-called negotiations were just the two sides haggling over the number of troops to be sent and the supply of food. Facing the hundreds of thousands of desolate men who had reappeared after 1,000 years, it was reasonable for both sides to join forces to resist. But who should be in charge of this and who should send more troops? The desolate men were born warriors. In the bloody battle in the north at the beginning of spring, the grassland cavalrymen suffered heavy casualties, which once again proved this almost forgotten theory. If they wanted to stop the desolate man from going south or even drive them back to the extremely cold north, they would have to pay a heavy price. Who would be willing to let their own army be at the forefront? Regarding this matter, the Divine Hall and the Tang Empire both showed a very tough attitude. The army pressed on the long frontier fortress in the north of Yan Kingdom, and the young cultivators of various sects were sent out. The grassland left king's palace had already been seriously damaged in the war with the desolate man. In the face of such a situation, even if Chanyu wanted to show his toughness, he did not have much confidence. Negotiations depended on who had the stronger spine and who had the more confidence. Once one side was not confident enough and lowered his head, the negotiations would naturally be much smoother. On the second day, when Ning Ke and the disciples of Black Ink Garden arrived at the palace, the two sides finally reached a consensus. Before the second wave of fertile grass grew at the turn of the next spring and summer, the left king's palace would send their main force to the north to attack the desolate man's tribe. As for the Central Plains, they only agreed to send about 6,000 cavalry troops, but promised to give the left king's palace the most generous financial aid. They also agreed to provide most of the food and armaments that the left king's palace needed. The news of the successful negotiation was carried by the winter wind and spread across the entire meadow at the fastest speed possible. The cloud-like tents were filled with either enthusiastic cheers or low curses. The royal court tribe began to prepare strong wine and delicacies. Other than that, they also decided to hold an impromptu Gumumu meeting. Gumumu was a barbarian word that meant a joyous gathering. It would only be held during the grandest festival in the grasslands. The royal court had decided to hold a Gumumu gathering at the last minute. Firstly, it was to celebrate the success of the peace talks. Secondly, it was to use this opportunity to allow the people of the royal court tribe to interact with the people of the Central Plains. As for whether this intention could be realized or not, no one knew. The sound of the zither, the horn sounded, and all kinds of colorful banners flew in the wind. People from all over gathered on the meadow. It was extremely lively, especially outside the open area where the competition of horsemanship and archery was held. It was densely packed. The people in leather or cotton-padded jackets did not stand shoulder to shoulder like brothers. They still stood together with their companions and had their own camps. However, this did not stop them from cheering when they saw the wonderful horsemanship performance in the Gumumu meeting. The sheep-catching competition ended and the winning rider received a generous reward. This also made the following archery competition even more exciting. A royal court archer successfully defeated his opponent with his superb archery skills. The arrows on the red target seemed to overlap, causing the crowd to cheer loudly. Ning Ke and the Great River girls stopped in the crowd to watch. No one from the Divine Hall paid attention to the arrival of the Black Ink Garden disciples. They were also free and simply came out of the tent to watch the show. Mo Shanshan stayed in the tent as usual to write. No one tried to persuade her otherwise. Cat Girl looked at the royal court archer who was being carried on the shoulders of a fellow tribesman and snorted in disdain. She tugged at Ning Ke's sleeve and said, "Senior brother, why don't you participate in the competition? Whether it is horsemanship or archery, these people are far worse than you. Why don't you go up and win back all the rewards?" Ning Ke glanced at her and said with a smile, "Of course not." Facing this little girl, he always felt that he was looking at Sang Sang when she was young. Therefore, both his expression and words naturally revealed a sense of closeness. Those who dare to compete in the Gumumu meeting are all the best hunters in the grassland. The archer from the Yen Kingdom is also very powerful. Even if I participate in the competition, how can I win? This was the truth. Whether it was the wilderness or the Central Plains, there were many hidden talents. There was no reason to win. This was also a lie. If Ning Ke had used his full strength, whether it was the sheep-catching competition earlier or the archery competition now, no one present could beat him. Cat Girl looked at him and sighed helplessly. "Senior brother, you are good at everything except for being too humble." Ning Ke could not help but laugh. He thought that whether it was Mo Shanshan or Cat Girl, they always used various ways to praise him directly and sincerely. If he spent too much time with these pure Great River Kingdom girls, he was really worried that one day he would float up to the sky. He rubbed her head affectionately and said, "When you grow up, you will understand that if you always want to be in the limelight, there will be a time when you will be blown by the wind and break your back. The people of the Great River Kingdom were deeply influenced by the Tang Empire. They were persevering, concise, and yearned for victory. They placed great importance on honor and treated it as their lives. Therefore, Cat Girl did not understand why he would say this. Her bright eyes were filled with confusion. During the Gumumu meeting, other than the various competitions and entertainment, the palace tribe also provided many delicacies for the participants. Cat Girl's attention was attracted by the fragrant roasted leg of lamb and she instantly forgot her previous doubts. Zhuozhihua and the other Great River Kingdom girls were also attracted by the milk tea and other foreign delicacies that they had never seen before and gradually dispersed into the crowd. After the peace treaty was concluded, it was the season of revelry. At this time, the palace's meadow was undoubtedly the safest place in the world. Ning Ke looked at the curious and eager Great River Kingdom girls in front of the various food stalls and smiled. He was not too worried. The meadow in the distance suddenly became even more lively. Noisy cheers and cheers rose and fell. The winter clouds in the sky seemed to be shaken away by the heat wave. Cat Girl held the large roasted leg of lamb. Her bright eyes were wide open as she looked curiously in that direction. However, she could not see what was happening because of the crowd. The horse racing must have started. Ning Ke took the roasted leg of lamb that she could barely hold in her small hands. He took out a handkerchief and handed it to her, indicating for her to wipe off the oil stain at the corner of her lips. He continued, "The people of the wilderness live as nomads and are best at riding and shooting. Horses are extremely important to them, so horse racing is the most important event of the Gumumu meeting." Cat Girl said excitedly, "Senior brother, I want to go and watch." Ning Ke held the greasy leg of lamb in one hand and Cat Girl's hand in the other as they walked towards the periphery of the crowd. Chapter 228. In the middle of the fierce horse race, more than 10 fine horses had finished 1/3 of the distance with smoke and dust. In front of the palace knight's yellow buckskin horse and the Tang soldier's jade-spotted horse, was the snow-white fine horse that firmly occupied the first place. Judging from the snow horse's gentle nodding frequency and steady pace, it should still have energy left. It seemed that if the race continued like this, it would undoubtedly be the first to cross the finish line. However, at this moment, a burst of surprised and shocked shouts rang out from the beginning of the racetrack. Countless people cried out in surprise, not knowing what they had seen. Ning Ke and Cat Girl looked in the direction of the sound and saw a pure black horse rushing onto the track. It was like an arrow leaving the bow, chasing the horses in front at a terrifying speed. The horse race had already started. No one knew where the big black horse came from. There was no one on the horse and no master to control it. No one knew why it ran onto the track. Ning Ke looked at the big black horse and opened his mouth slightly, but he did not know what to say. Cat Girl rubbed her eyes with the back of her fingers and said curiously, "I seem to have seen this horse somewhere." The big black horse seemed to have been stimulated by the horse races on the grassland. After it rushed onto the track, it ran faster and faster without the whips and kicks of the jockeys. Its 4 powerful hooves quickly kicked on the slightly hard ground, kicking up black flowers one after another. Its body gradually dragged out a black shadow. The onlookers looked at the terrifyingly fast big black horse and could not help but be dumbfounded and shocked. They did not know that there was a horse that could run so fast in the world. In the dense crowd, as the big black horse's hoofbeats passed by, there was a wave of exclamations. The people who participated in the Gumumu gathering all knew some riding skills. Although the weight of the horse was lighter without a rider on its back, without the rider's command, the horse did not know how to allocate its strength. Moreover, it lacked the stimulation of pain during the final sprint. Therefore, although people were shocked by the speed of the big black horse, they still did not think it could catch up with the horses in front, not to mention that the horses in front had already run a long distance. Based on this idea, although the people along the way were still amazed by the sudden appearance of the big black horse and its amazing speed. Those who were concerned about the outcome of the horse race had already turned their attention to the front. The palace had prepared a large field for this horse race. Since the journey was far away, the distance between the horses was widening due to the difference in strength. It stared at the white horse's buttocks with hatred, and the speed of its four hooves on the ground increased, and instantly surpassed the white horse's buttocks. The onlookers in the wilderness let out a deafening cheer. The knight of the divine hall on the white horse was shocked. His body bent forward, and his right hand that was holding the horsewhip tightened. He knew that the white horse under him was a gift from the palace to the noblewoman. It was already a great honor for him to be riding on her behalf. If he lost today, it would be a terrible ending. Since the beginning of the race, the knight of the divine hall had only waved the horsewhip twice in the air, and not once on the white horse. That was because he did not have the guts to leave a bloody mark on the noblewoman's horse. However, the situation was so tense, and the big black horse that appeared out of nowhere seemed to have the ability to surpass him. He made up his mind and was ready to whip the horse's buttocks. At this moment, no one expected that after the big white horse noticed the big black horse, it seemed to be greatly stimulated. It did not even need the knight to whip it, and suddenly began to speed up. It was only then that the people in the wilderness realized that the snow-white horse had not exerted its full speed. That was why it looked so graceful and stable before. Now, it was stimulated by the big black horse, and finally began to display all its abilities. It was no longer graceful, and actually began to run extremely crazily. A white snowstorm had officially begun. And the black shadow followed closely behind, not willing to fall behind at all. The cheers and shouts of surprise in the wilderness reached their climax at this moment. The winter clouds drifting in the sky dispersed one by one. Between the heaven and earth, there was a clear light. Visibility was very clear. The big white horse and the big black horse were almost neck and neck, but the white horse was half a body length ahead. At this time, both of them were sprinting with all their might, madly kicking their hooves and swinging their heads. They did not care about running elegantly, and they were running crazily. The relative speed between the two seemed to be extremely slow, or even about to stop. The finish line was not far ahead. The spectators in the wilderness gradually had a feeling that the big black horse could never surpass it. Many of them felt extremely regretful and sighed in their hearts. The big black horse did not have time to sigh. Since it was born, it had stayed in the military camp on the north side of the Tang Empire and in the horse farm outside Chang'an. It had bullied countless of its own kind and countless humans, but it had only been bullied by one human. It was the first time for it to run desperately like today, and it was the first time for it to breathe so heavily. Everyone thought that it could not surpass the white horse in front of it, but it was not convinced, unwilling to accept its fate. It squeezed out all the strength in its body, burned all the desire, and still sped up in the impossible. The tips of its hooves stepped on the black soil, and it caught up with the white horse inch by inch, like the shadow of the night attacking the earth. The horse's hooves broke the black soil, and the night shadow swallowed the wind and snow. Just before the finish line, it finally succeeded in surpassing the white horse and was the first to rush over. There was a silence in the wilderness, and then there was deafening cheers. The bigwigs in front of the king's tent were silent, and then there were countless exclamations. Some sharp-eyed powerhouses even noticed that just before it rushed over the finish line, the big black horse still had the strength to look back at the white horse mockingly. At the same time, it flipped its thick lips at high speed, looking extremely disdainful. General Shu of the Tang Empire looked at the big black horse in a daze and murmured, "I seem to have seen this horse somewhere." The chief figure of the Divine Hall who participated in the negotiation of the palace was the priest of the Revelation Department. He looked at the group of horses rushing over the finish line, frowned, and glanced at the commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall beside him. The gaze of the priest of the Revelation Department was very indifferent, very cold. The commander of the cavalrymen of Divine Hall felt very cold, very cold. He knew the hidden meaning in the priest's indifferent gaze, because the cavalryman of Divine Hall who rode on the white horse was the best knight he had specially selected in advance. However, riding on Princess Chinjia's horse, he inexplicably lost to a big black horse that came out of nowhere, and in such a way. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall were under the jurisdiction of the Judicial Department, not directly under the Revelation Department. But the priest was a person of high status, and if Princess Chinjia was displeased because of this, how would Prince Longqing deal with him? The more the commander thought about it, the more scared he became. He stared at the big black horse that was panting in the field, and thought to himself, where did this beast come from? I will definitely kill it after this. Which tribe does this big black horse belong to? Standing at the forefront, Chanyu of the left king's palace looked at the dark and shiny steed under the sun, and his heart was filled with infinite love. He waved his hand and said, "Go and ask. I want it. I can exchange anything for it." There was some distance between the gentle slope and the grassland, but Ning Ke had no reason not to recognize his silly horse, especially when the big black horse turned its head and glanced at him before crossing the finishing line, and rolled its thick lips. It was unique. He thought speechlessly, what's wrong with this guy today? It actually wanted to race with others, which was completely inconsistent with its usual laziness. Halfway through, Cat Girl had confirmed that the big black horse was the horse of her senior brother beside her. At this time, seeing that the big black horse had won the ultimate incredible victory, she excitedly jumped on the gentle slope and clapped her hands. She grabbed Ning Ke's sleeves and kept shaking, and said excitedly, "Senior brother, look, look, big black one." Ning Ke sighed and said, "This guy really likes to be in the limelight. Why is he not like me at all?" Cat Girl's excitement was disturbed by his sigh, and she pouted and said, "I just don't understand. What's wrong with being in the limelight? You should know that victory is the greatest honor." Ning Ke did not answer the little girl, and thought helplessly in his heart, "Big Black Horse is so arrogant in public, what if someone recognizes him? I was still hesitating about when to reveal my identity, and now I'm forced to be led by a horse. But shouldn't he be leading the horse?" The intense horse race made the hearts of all the people attending the Gumumu meeting beat faster, and they forgot everything around them. Cat Girl, who knew the origin of the big black horse, was even more nervous. The leg of lamb that she had received from Ning Ke was nowhere to be found, and her hands were empty with the mutton fat and fragrance. She carefully wiped her hands with a handkerchief, and thought for a while, and said to Ning Ke, "Senior brother, your handkerchief is dirty. I'll wash it and return it to you, okay?" Ning Ke smiled and took the handkerchief directly, and said, "I know how to do this kind of thing." Everything on him and in his bag was prepared by Sang Sang before he left, so he had been very careful. If he lost the handkerchief in the wilderness, he was worried that he would not be able to explain it to his family in Chang'an. Cat Girl's words had no other meaning, and she did not know what Ning Ke was thinking at this time. Looking at the big black horse in the wilderness, she happily waved and said with a smile, "Senior brother, don't be fooled by the fact that you don't feed big black horse and enslave it every day, but it will shine when it needs to shine. If you don't treat it well, it will be taken away by someone in the future, and it won't miss you. Don't regret it then." Hearing this, Ning Ke could not help but think of a busy, skinny back and a dark face. His heart could not help but shrink. As the heavenly cat girl looked down, his heart could not help but shrink. In shock, he held the heavenly cat girl in his arms as fast as he could and covered her eyes with his hands. In the wilderness, the horses that had rushed past the finish line were all panting heavily, kicking their front hooves from time to time to recover their strength according to their familiar method. The riders on the horses were also helped to rest. The big black horse's strength recovered extremely quickly, and it only took a short time for it to be as energetic as before. More than a dozen people from the palace surrounded it, looking at it curiously and asking around who its master was. The big black horse seemed to enjoy the feeling of being the center of attention. It gently shook its head and looked extremely proud. From time to time, it stuck out its long red tongue and licked its thick lips. Not far away, the snow-white horse was panting violently, being led by a knight of the divine hall to walk slowly to the side. Seeing the big black horse rolling its tongue and licking its lips, there was hatred in its eyes. The big black horse happened to see this scene, and was greatly stimulated by Ning Kei's death threat. It crazily pushed away the people around it and rushed toward the white horse. The white horse was also a talented horse, but it had never seen such a thick-skinned and abnormally strong horse like the big black horse. It wanted to kick back to defend itself, but it was too weak to resist. The big black horse bit the back of the white horse's neck. It did not bleed, but it did not hold back its teeth. The white horse let out a sad cry. The big black horse bit the white horse's mane and put its front hooves on it. Its strong body pressed on the white horse unreasonably. Looking at it, anyone could guess what it would do next. There was a burst of laughter from all around. The princess looked extremely embarrassed. She stood up and scolded her subordinates to quickly separate the two horses. Lu Qinjia looked there quietly, her expression still as pure as an orchid that had just bloomed. However, her hands in her sleeves gradually clenched. Suddenly, there was a sharp whistle from afar. The big black horse seemed to have heard the soul-sucking bell. It shivered all over and got off the horse. It knocked away the people around it who wanted to restrain it, and like a black flash, it rushed out of the camp and began to run crazily again. As it ran, it thought proudly, "I only ate a meal from your trough last night. White horse, you bitch, how dare you call a bunch of sisters to deal with me? Do you really think I can't deal with you?" The cold wind was like a knife. The big black horse was full of heroism, and its hooves were dancing. If I don't have some craziness, I really can't win anything. There is still one day left. I thought I would be too lazy to ask for votes before the completion of the 10,000 words in 7 days, but I realized that the last step was too hard. I have lost all my heroism, and I am already a scum. Chapter 229. Ignoring the bustle in the wilderness, Ning Kei returned to the camp with Cat Girl. He lifted the curtain and walked into the tent. He glanced at the luggage piled in the corner and looked at Mo Shanshan, who was concentrating on writing calligraphy. He asked, "Wasn't my black horse tied outside the tent? Why did it slip out?" Mo Shanshan put down the brush in her hand and looked back at him. She explained expressionlessly, "You tied it up after it came back in the morning. After you left, I was the only one left in the tent. It kept barking and kicking its hooves. It looked like it wanted to go out to play, so I untied the rope and let it play on its own." Ning Kei looked at her and didn't know what to say. He scratched his head and said, "You let it go when it wanted to go out. Why does this sound wrong? It's a horse, not a human. The big black horse is very intelligent. I can understand what it wants to say." After saying this, Mo Shanshan didn't want to explain more about this matter. She turned around and picked up the brush on the inkstone, ready to continue copying. Cat Girl ran to her excitedly and said, "Senior sister, you are right. The big black horse is more than intelligent. It's so powerful. Do you know that many people are chasing after it?" Mo Shanshan slightly raised her black eyebrows and asked, "What happened?" Cat Girl carefully told the process of the big black horse's appearance and winning the horse race. Then she said, "As for what happened in the end, senior brother covered my eyes, so I didn't see it." Mo Shanshan looked at Ning Quebec. Ning Kei wondered how he should describe that scene. He raised his hand to cover his mouth and coughed twice. He pretended not to see Mo Shanshan's gaze and walked out of the tent. Standing on the slightly hard winter wilderness and looking at the fluttering flag of the Tang army and the heavily guarded camp not far from the west, he began to think about other problems. Where should he start to find the head of the horse gang? As the representative of the Tang Empire in this negotiation, General Xu Qing brought his trusted subordinates and traveled thousands of miles from Chang'an to this place. The safety of the 300 elite cavalrymen of the northeast border military was in charge of the security. Banners fluttered in the wind and the occasional neighing of horses could be heard. The tents were arranged in an orderly manner and the Tang camp was densely packed. In the tent in the center of the Tang camp, General Xu Qing took off his helmet and carelessly stroked his gray hair. He sat behind the table and signaled his subordinates to prepare some food. He drank a lot in the king's tent, but he could not eat his fill. General Xu held his fork and food as he ate, remaining silent. The subordinate next to him noticed that the general was deep in thought. He thought that the general was in a bad mood after hearing some gossip about today's horse race. After thinking for a while, he comforted, "General, our cavalry is good at fighting. We are really not good at this kind of pure racing. If we lost, we lost. If that old aunt wants to gossip, no one can stop her. That old woman doesn't know shit," General Xu said mockingly. As a general of the Tang Empire, he had to be careful with his words when he respected Quni Madi as the sister of the Yueluan kingdom's king. But in this private military tent, he was not in the mood to give that aunt any face. Seeing that the general was really not upset about this matter, the subordinate thought of another matter. He glanced at the patrolling soldiers outside the tent and asked in a low voice, "General, are you worried about Tuyang City?" In the summer, the imperial court confirmed that the matter of assisting the Northern Yan expedition would be presided over by the Tang Empire's Eastern Army General Xiahou. But no one would have thought that when the Central Plains began to negotiate with the grassland barbarians, His Majesty had already ordered the military ministry to intervene in this matter. Although General Xu Qing came to the palace on imperial orders, it inevitably angered the border military. When he passed by Tuyang City, General Xiahou used the excuse of patrolling the border and did not even want to see him. "If I were General Xiahou, I would not be happy either." General Xu Qing smiled slightly and put down the chopsticks in his hand. He took the towel and wiped his face casually. He said, "Don't guess blindly. I am indeed thinking about something, but it has nothing to do with the two things you guessed." The subordinate frowned slightly and thought that the two sides had reached an agreement. The next thing to do was to discuss the northern expedition next year with the Central Plains Coalition Army and the specific matters of assisting the Left Tent Palace. Everything would be done naturally. If the general was not upset about losing the horse race and not worried about the anger of Tuyang City, then what was he thinking about? "I am thinking about the big black horse," General Xu Qing said with a smile. The subordinate suddenly understood and thought that he finally understood the general's thoughts. After a moment of thought, he said, "Chanyu seems to be very interested in that fine horse. But since the general likes it, I will think of some ways to inform the steward of the king's tent later. I believe that Chanyu will not be stingy with the horse to show his closeness to the Tang Empire." General Xu Qing looked at the subordinate and sighed helplessly. He scolded, "I don't know what is going on in your head. I don't want the big black horse. If Chanyu wants the horse, he will only get into trouble in the end." Looking at the confused expression on the subordinate's face, the general shook his head and looked at the blue sky outside the tent. He frowned slightly and said, "When I saw the big black horse today, I felt that it was a little familiar. I always felt that I had seen it somewhere before." General Xu Qing threw the towel on the table and said with a reminiscing expression, "At that moment, I just remembered that I had seen the big black horse in the driving examination last spring when I represented the military ministry to inspect the academy entrance examination of the academy." The subordinate was stunned. He thought of the black lightning running in the wilderness and the violent black storm. He thought that the incredible horse actually came from the Tang Empire. You also saw how hot-tempered the big black horse was. During the academy entrance examination last spring, all the candidates who were chosen to ride the big black horse fell off, including the daughter of General Yunhui. I was patrolling above the meadow at that time and thought that no one could tame the horse. Then I saw a lad walk into the stud field. General Shu Qing squinted slightly and recalled the scene at that time. He said slowly, the big black horse suddenly became very obedient in front of the lad. I thought it was a little strange at that time, but when the lad's name shook Chang'an City, I realized that the warhorse was actually very intelligent. It actually knew the lad's power before anyone else. The subordinate asked curiously, "Who is that lad?" The general withdrew his gaze and looked at him. He said, "Ning Quebec Ning K." The subordinate murmured. Suddenly he looked shocked and said in surprise, "Are you talking about Sir Ning, who shocked Chang'an with a piece of paper?" "I don't like to play with words." General Shu sighed and said, "I only know that Ning K entered the academy last year and entered the second floor this year. He has become a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. I also know that when Ning K left Chang'an City, the stud field in the suburbs specially sent this big black horse to him." The subordinate asked, then, "Why did this big black horse appear in the palace?" As soon as the words left his mouth, he knew that he had asked a very stupid question. Such an unparalleled horse would naturally not be too far away from its master. If the horse was in the palace, it would naturally be in the palace. Ordinary people don't know that Ning K is ranked 13th on the second floor of the academy. But of course the military ministry knows that he used the name of Mr. 13 and stayed at the frontier fortress of north of Yan Kingdom. But even I did not expect him to personally come to the palace. General Shu frowned slightly and said to himself in a low voice, "Even the academy attaches so much importance to this peace conference. Are the desolate men in the north really so troublesome? Or is there another secret about this matter?" The subordinate thought for a moment and asked puzzledly, "General, since Ning K has come to the palace, why did he not show himself or come to the camp to meet you?" General Shu was silent for a moment and said with a smile, "What kind of person is the core disciple of the headmaster of the academy? He must have his reasons for not showing himself. I probably don't have that much influence. I just feel that this matter is getting more and more interesting." Dusk fell. The bonfire was lit and the sheep were hung upside down. As the aroma of wine filled the air, night fell upon the wilderness. People from all over the world gathered in the palace tribe. There were also many herdsmen from the surrounding tribes who had specially come to participate in the Gumumu gathering. Under the light of the fire and the aroma of wine, people excitedly discussed the scenes they had seen during the day. They argued about which warriors were the most powerful and whose archery skills were the best. Of course, the one that was most mentioned was the violent black horse. Countless people were guessing who its owner was. The owner of the big black horse did not hear the excited discussions of the people. He did not enjoy the wine and meat. Instead, he stole the clothes of a herdsman from the grassland. Under the cover of the night, he snuck west from the great river camp and approached the Tang camp silently. He then turned south and sat down behind a high ground. After some time, a figure approached from the direction of the Tang camp. From his speed and body shape, it could be seen that this person was extremely cautious and vigilant. "I've never understood. How can you be so sure that it's one of our people coming by drawing a picture with a wooden stick outside the camp? What if it's just a random drawing by the children on the grassland?" Ning K looked at the man and said. Although there was no fire behind the meadow, he could still vaguely make out the man's face and attire under the starry sky. He looked like an honest Tang cavalryman. The Tang soldier did not answer his question. His eyes were filled with suspicion, as if he did not understand why this fellow would have the leisure to say such nonsense under such circumstances. Ning K stretched out his hand, and the Tang soldier stretched out his hand as well. They seemed to be shaking hands, but with a light snap, the two waist tokens were gently put together, exactly the same. With the help of the starlight, the Tang soldier clearly saw the lines on Ning K's waist token. His expression suddenly changed, and he hurriedly saluted with hands folded in front. He lowered his voice and said respectfully, I didn't expect His Excellency to come in person. You don't know who I am. How do you know that I'm His Excellency? Ning Ke asked with a smile. The Tang soldier's honest face revealed a simple and honest smile. What he did every day was to observe any movement in the Tang battalion. So when he heard Ning Ke's question, he nodded without hesitation and answered, I have a basic grasp of it. Ning Ke glanced at him and thought that he was really lucky. He asked, is there any special situation in the camp in the last 5 days? For example, are there any injured cavalrymen, or even generals? The Tang soldier thought for a while and shook his head. No. Ning Ke said after a moment of silence, is there anything worth paying attention to in the logistics of food and medicine? The Tang soldier was about to answer no when he suddenly thought of something. He frowned and thought carefully for a while. Then he said, there is indeed something. The consumption of food in a tent seems to be a lot more than usual. This is not surprising. But there is also some problem with the storage of medicine in the camp. Before Ning Ke could continue to ask, he added, the military medicine is the focus of the department, so I think there is something wrong. The medicine that is consumed for no reason are not only the medicine for hemostasis and muscle regeneration, but also some powder to calm the mind. But these medicines should not be used these days. Hearing this, Ning Ke's eyes gradually brightened. He knew that his guess seemed to be in the right direction. He looked at the brightly lit Tang battalion and asked, where is that tent? Can you find out who is in it? This time, the 300 cavalrymen who escorted General Shu into the wilderness are all from Tiang City. That tent belongs to a deputy general of the Northern Army in the east. It is heavily guarded, and ordinary cavalrymen like me can't even get close. Ning Ke frowned slightly. His eyes slowly swept across the continuous tents, as if he wanted to see the military tent. He said, since it is so heavily guarded, is there any way to sneak in and take a look? The Tang soldier did not even think about it. He shook his head and said, unless you break in. Then he looked at Ning Ke and added very seriously, Sir, although you are a respected foreign official and have a strong state, I am afraid there will be some problems if you break in. Even if you can break in, many people in the camp will die. How will you explain it to the imperial court afterwards? Since there was no way to sneak in, the only way was to break in. However, although he was now a student of the academy, he still regarded himself as a member of the imperial army. He would never take the initiative to fight against his fellow soldiers, so he had to think of another way. Taking advantage of the quiet night and the sparse stars, the guy who was placed in the Northern Army by the Imperial Center Administration sneaked back to the Tang battalion. Only Ning Ke was left behind on the meadow. The sparse yellow grass on the cold ground looked like the beard of a malnourished old man. Ning Ke lay on the sparse grass and looked at the stars in the night sky above his head. No one knew what he was thinking. A shadow suddenly covered the starry sky above his head, as if the dark night had come. Ning Ke looked at the black horse's face close to him. He looked at its thick lips that seemed to be trying to please him. He could not help but scold it with a smile, the whole palace wants to catch you, and you still dare to come back to see me. The big black horse gently arched his shoulder. It looked extremely docile and even a little quiet, as if it was telling him that as long as he was not angry, it did not matter what others said to it. Ning Ke stood up and patted off the sand and grass on his back. He gently punched the big black horse's neck and shook his head. He lectured, people are afraid of being famous, while pigs are afraid of being fat. People are afraid of trouble when they are famous, and pigs are easy to be killed for meat when they are fat. Why do you have to be in the limelight? Aren't you afraid that you will be snatched away when you are too famous? The big black horse shook its head and opened its mouth. Its white teeth looked a little creepy under the starlight, as if it was sneering. It was indescribably cold, arrogant, and stupid. Ning Ke stared at its eyes and sneered, do you mean that even if you are snatched away, you will be treated like a treasure and will not be ordered around like an invincible horse like me." The big black horse gently kicked its hooves and silently dug the floating soil on the wilderness. It cautiously used silence to represent its admission. Ning Kai sneered and pointed at the middle of its two strong hind legs. He said, "I don't know why the Southern Army didn't castrate you, nor did they castrate you in the field. I also don't know how you escaped the fate of being a eunuch. But you should know very well that I have no intention of castrating you. But my kindness does not mean that everyone else is. With your bad temper, do you really think that you can keep your precious eggs if you fall into the hands of Chanyu or the princess?" A cold winter wind blew over the meadow. Fear suddenly appeared in the big black horse's black eyes. It was unknown whether it was because of the cold or something else, but it quickly clamped its hind legs together. However, because of its huge and powerful buttocks, it could not completely clamp them together. Ning Kai used the dark night to complete another spy contact in his life. He sorted out the situation of the Tang army and took the time to educate the big black horse. He did so many things. There were countless bonfires on the meadow. In the tents of the palace, it was as if it was daytime, but the people only did one thing, and that was to drink. The wilderness was like heaven in spring, but it was as miserable and unbearable as the underworld in midwinter. The cold wind howled and snowflakes fell at any time. It was extremely cold, so the people who lived here liked to drink to warm themselves up, especially hard liquor. The people of the Central Plains and the grassland barbarians beside the bonfire had been constantly fighting over trade and war for 1,000 years. The invasion of the borders not long ago and the counterattack by the Central Plains allied forces after that had caused many casualties on both sides. How could the hatred formed by blood naturally disappear just because the higher-ups had reached an agreement? With complicated emotions, the people of the Palace tribe began to compete in drinking with the people of the Central Plains. The alcohol entered their stomachs and did not dispel their hatred. Instead, it magnified their emotions. As a result, the drinking competition became a competition, and the competition became a brawl. The soldiers of the palace and the Divine Hall, who were in charge of maintaining order, had to rush to another place after quelling a fight. The scene was extremely chaotic. There were a few tents set up at the edge of the meadow. They were very close to the Tang army, but not within the range of the Tang army. They were not affected by the chaos around the bonfires and were still exceptionally quiet, just like the people who lived there. The girls from the Great River Kingdom saw many new and interesting things at the Gumumu gathering. They were quiet and composed, so they returned to the campsite in the evening. Mo Shanshan sat quietly in her tent for an entire day. White paper was spread out on the table, and she hung her wrist over it, copying something. It was as if she did not know the meaning of boredom. At this moment, the tent flap was lifted. Zhuo Zhihua walked in with a young girl. She looked at Mo Shanshan and said gently, "Hill Master, a guest has come to visit." Mo Shanshan slowly stopped writing. She put the brush into a jar of clear water and turned around. The young girl was wearing the uniform of the Revelation Institute of the Divine Hall, but there was an unconcealable pride in her eyes. She had been looking around since she entered the tent, trying her best to look calm. But when she saw the young girl in white beside the table turn around, she still felt a little nervous. Because this was the first time she had seen the legendary calligraphy addict. Mo Shanshan looked at her indifferently and said, "Who are you?" The calligraphy addict was used to speaking in such a direct tone. She did not like to talk nonsense. She was used to looking indifferent because she felt that it was very difficult to make an expression. She was used to looking disrespectful because her eyes were not very good. But just like Ning Kai, who did not know that someone had an eye disease, the female student of the Revelation Institute also felt that she had been severely underestimated and even humiliated. Her nervousness became a little irritated, but she still did not dare to be rude. Again, this was the first time she had seen the legendary calligraphy addict. The calligraphy addict was proud and rude. To the students of the Revelation Institute who had always been with another addict, it was easy to understand and accept. The female student of the Revelation Institute bowed respectfully and said, "Princess Chen Jia invites senior sister Mo for a chat tomorrow." Mo Shanshan looked at her quietly and thought of her old friend whom she had not seen for a long time. She thought of her old friend who was as calm as an orchid in the horse carriage above the meadow. After a moment of silence, she said, "I understand. Tonight, please do not talk to me about quality. It will be changed in the future. Tonight, please talk to me about dreams and about the honor of my father's generation. I do not believe that honor is my life. But the honor of my family seems to be taking my life." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 230. Everything in the world, be it human or emotional life, was most afraid of comparison. The girls from the Great River Kingdom chose a flat ground outside of the Tang camp to camp. Although it was a little cold and cheerless, they felt that it was quiet and not too dissatisfied. However, when they walked into the gorgeous tent where the students of the Revelation Institute were, no matter how tranquil they could not help but feel a little sad when they saw the array equipment and exquisite food. They were all young people who came under the edict of the West Hill Divine Palace. Why did the disciples of the Black Ink Garden not have a good camp in the military camp of the north of Yen Kingdom? They took on a difficult task and risked their lives to come to the palace, but they still did not have a good camp. But these students of the Revelation Institute had such good treatment when they came to the palace, humming and drinking tea. Especially when they recalled the bloody battle with the horse gang under the meadow, they thought that when they and the others were struggling in the camp and could die at any time, the students of the Revelation Institute were coldly watching from their mounts above the meadow. The girls of the Great River Kingdom found it more and more difficult to accept and were unusually depressed. The students of the Revelation Institute sitting opposite them were not sad, nor were they in low spirits. There was no shame on their faces for the robbery by the horse gang. They slowly drank the tea from the precious porcelain bowls in the wilderness and did their duty as hosts to talk gently with the girls of the Great River Kingdom. There was a faint sense of superiority in their words. The Revelation Institute was the research academy of Haotian Taoism. It was personally taught by the West Hill Divine Palace's divine priest. For thousands of years, it had cultivated many famous bigwigs. In recent years, the Tao addict, Yi Hongyu, and Prince Long Qin, who were the priests of the judicial department of the Divine Hall, were well-known powerhouses. In the hearts of these young disciples, other than the academy in the south of Chang'an, there was no other place in the world that could be compared to the Revelation Institute. The girls of the Great River Kingdom suppressed their discomfort and hatred. The students of the Revelation Institute only cared about showing their demeanor and pride. Naturally, it was impossible for them to agree with each other. But there was no conflict because of this. They just gradually stopped talking and only talked to their own sect, as if they could not see each other. In any case, they were not the main characters today. The real main characters had already entered the depths of the tent. The conversation between the two girls behind the magnificent screen was the most important matter of the day. Ning Kei, who was wearing the disciple uniform of Black Ink Garden, was sitting on a chair below. He leaned sideways and whispered something to Cat Girl. From time to time, Cat Girl's innocent and lovely face showed a strange and excited expression. Her little hand gently stroked a square box beside her, looking extremely cautious. Could this be a gift from the calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, to the flower addict, Lu Qinjia? There were countless beauties in the world, but only 3 were famous. According to the gossip of the world, the flower addict Lu Qinjia, the princess of the Yueluan kingdom, the calligraphy addict Mo Shanshan, the last female disciple of the master of calligrapher of the Great River Kingdom, and the Tao addict Yi Hongyu of the judicial department of West Hill were known as the 3 addicts of the world. The beauty in everyone's eyes was different. Naturally, there was no such thing as the most beautiful person in the world. The reason why there were the three fanatics in the world was because these three girls were obsessed with a certain realm. Their cultivation realms were profound, and they had powerful backgrounds. Behind the magnificent screen in the depths of the tent, Mo Shanshan looked expressionlessly at the beautiful girl in a light yellow slanted shirt. She said, "You were on the meadow that day." Lu Qinjia was diligently trimming the branches and leaves of an exotic 7-petal flower. When she heard this, she raised her head and smiled. She said, "This is the flower that the princess treasures. It's a pity that she didn't raise it properly. The roots have no spirit, and the flower naturally has no soul when it blooms. It's so pale that it hurts." The princess of the Yueluan kingdom had loved flowers since she was young. Before she met the perfect man in the palace, flowers were everything to her. They were even more important than her own life. Because of her love affair with Prince Long Qing and her love for flowers, everyone in the world knew of her reputation. However, when people talked about her, they could not help but talk about her appearance first. The flower addict, Lu Qinjia, was very beautiful. Her eyelashes and brows were all beautiful. She looked beautiful from every angle. She was like a meticulously cultivated flower, its petals trembling in the spring breeze. Sometimes it was budding, sometimes it was blooming, and sometimes it was shy. She was beautiful. The calligraphy addict, Mo Shanshan, was completely different from her. Her eyebrows were thin and thick, as if they were drawn by an ink brush. Although her gaze was unfocused, it was truly clear without any distractions. Her lips were pressed into a line, and her slightly round cheeks did not seem to have the characteristics of a traditional beauty. However, when these seemingly ordinary details were put together, no matter how dull her expression was, she still looked very beautiful. According to her memory and the knowledge of the world, the calligraphy addict was someone who knelt in front of brush, ink, paper, and inkstone all day long. She did not care about the affairs of the world and would not speak her mind because she thought it was troublesome. She was extremely quiet. She had thought that since she invited Mo Shanshan to meet today, no matter how angry she was over the horse gang, she would not criticize her face to face. She did not expect Mo Shanshan to be so direct and tough. Lu Qinjia looked at her quietly. After a long silence, she said, "Sister Mo, you have changed. You have become much more direct and mean. I am very surprised. Mo Shanshan thought about it seriously for a moment and replied, "I did not know that being direct would sometimes have an effect of being mean." Lu Qinjia looked at her and sighed softly. She smiled bitterly and said, "I did not expect that even you have changed." Mo Shanshan replied calmly, "I have learned many things from someone recently. I am getting used to this change." Lu Qinjia was silent for a moment and asked softly, "Did you come today to criticize me?" Mo Shanshan replied calmly and firmly, "If I did not come to criticize you, why would I come to see you?" Lu Qinjia sighed and said, "I only knew that you were under the meadow when you used the half-divine talisman." Mo Shanshan looked at her beautiful face and paused for a moment before saying, "Even if I was not under the meadow, there would be others under the blades of the horse gang." Lu Qinjia said calmly, "I know you and I admire you. So your life and death are related to me. If you die, I will be sad. The life and death of others have nothing to do with me. Naturally, I will not care." Mo Shanshan said, "I have a junior brother who died in the last attack of the horse gang." Lu Qinjia's tone was still calm. "I do not know your junior brother. So his life and death have nothing to do with me." Mo Shanshan looked at the precious flower tree beside her quietly and said, "Most people in the world have nothing to do with you and me. But this world has something to do with you and me. Because sorrow and joy are always interlinked. The sorrow and joy of humans are never interlinked." Lu Qinjia raised her beautiful face and said, "Why do people like you and me have to share the sorrow and joy of the people in the dirty world? Other than flowers and a few people, there is nothing clean in the world. But you and I are clean. If you and I care about the dirty world, we will be dragged into the dust one day. What does the sorrow and joy of the world have to do with me? Mo Shanshan's eyes drooped slightly. She looked at the mud stains on the bottom of her white dress. After a moment of silence, she raised her head and looked at her quietly. She said, "Ever since I was young, I could not win against you in an argument. I will not pretend to be a simple, sweet, and quiet orchid in front of others. So I do not want to talk to you anymore." Lu Qinjia looked at her and said emotionally, "You are being mean again. This is not good." Mo Shanshan replied calmly, "I am not being mean enough because you are not angry." Lu Qinjia frowned slightly and asked, "Why do you want to make me angry?" Mo Shanshan said, "Because I am angry because you do not know the reason why others are angry but do not care about it. It is also because I was angry under the meadow that day." There was silence in the depths of the magnificent tent. The long silence caused an inexplicable pressure to slowly surround them. The vines on the screen seemed to be about to be broken by this pressure. After some time, Lu Qinjia looked at her calmly and said, "I want to know how you will make me angry." Mo Shanshan said, "You should have known since young that I am not good with words. I have spent my entire life in front of paper and ink, so I am used to fighting. If I completely defeat you, I wonder if you will be angry." Lu Qinjia smiled slightly. She was like a water lily in a pond in the morning that was suddenly woken up by the chirping of a few birds. She slowly began to bloom its beautiful petals. It was so beautiful and quiet that one could not feel any hostility or desire to fight. The flower addict was the flower addict. She was infatuated with love, infatuated with her own knowledge and thoughts. She did not want to fight Mo Shanshan, so she did not prepare to do so. She only smiled quietly at Mo Shanshan. Facing such a beautiful girl who was smiling calmly at them, most people in the world, no matter how strong a cultivator's heart was, would not know what to do next. Did they really have to throw a punch? However, Mo Shanshan was the calligraphy addict. She had her own obsession. When she was obsessed, she was even more ruthless than the flower addict. When she decided to do something, she did not care what the situation was. Even if Lu Qinjia was a faint flower fragrance or a fragile jade carving, she did not have the spirit to pity her and attack directly. Two slender and steady fingers reached out of her wide sleeves. They were not swords but pens. They suddenly turned and began to write their own lines on the invisible paper on the invisible table in the air. Mo Shanshan's first move was the half-divine talisman. Lu Qinjia sat quietly in the chair. Suddenly, a transparent flower appeared on her fingers. The flower could not be said to be completely transparent. On its surface, there was a faint flow of primordial qi that resembled dew droplets flowing slowly. It looked like it was carved from fog and glaze. It was extremely beautiful. A terrifying pressure enveloped the tent as the half-divine talisman was drawn. A fresh aura seeped out of the tent along with the appearance of the flower. In a tent, the priest of the Revelation Department of the West Hill Divine Palace sensed the two auras coming from afar. He woke up from his meditation and looked in that direction through the curtain. He let out a soft sigh. The half-divine talisman was so full of energy. The calligraphy addict seemed to be stronger than when they met the thief on the meadow. Even he did not dare to say that he could win. Qinjia, this flower, was probably going to lose. Lu Qinjia looked at the flower that finally melted into the air and disappeared. She looked at the girl in white and said calmly, "My cultivation state is not as good as yours, and I am not as good as the Tao addict. But I really don't care. If I lose, I lose. What I like is cutting flowers and leaves." Mo Shanshan slowly retracted her right hand into her wide sleeves. She looked at her and said, "If you are only obsessed with flowers, then you are naturally not the flower addict." Lu Qinjia seemed to have thought of something. A gentle smile appeared on her face. There was also a hint of disappointment. She said, "The flower addict, the flower addict. I think it should be enough to be obsessed with people and flowers." Mo Shanshan stood up and looked at her. She said, "Back then, you used to hold a hoe and dig in the mud. Your hands were covered in dust and your face was covered in sweat. I think you were better then than the so-called quiet you now." Lu Qinjia lowered her head and continued cutting flowers. She said, "But he likes the current me more, and he will protect me." Mo Shanshan looked at her silently. Her lips curled into a smile. It was the first time in her life that she had learned to smile like a winner, so she looked a little awkward. "Someone told me last night that it doesn't matter how quiet you appear after you lose. But if you mention Long Qin, it means that you are starting to get angry. Then you will really lose." Lu Qinjia smiled and did not reply. The small scissors in her hands had cut off a green leaf. This chapter is better written than the previous one. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 231. The green leaves drifted down from the branches and slowly landed on the expensive wool carpet without making any sound. Lu Qinjia looked at the beautiful patterns on the wool carpet quietly. She looked at the lonely green leaf in the middle of the pattern. No one knew what she was thinking. After a long silence, she said softly, "My feelings for him are as natural as the orchids in the valley. Why did I mention it? Do I want to prove something?" Mo Shanshan answered directly, "He said that this is a public display of affection and a sign of lack of confidence. I don't know what it means to show off. I don't know why he said that, and I don't know what you want to prove either. But I know that orchids growing in the valley is natural. When you moved the flower in front of me and carefully cut it, it was no longer natural." She did not say anything else. She did not bid farewell and turned to walk out of the screen. Lu Qinjia stood up. Her eyes that were as clear as autumn water showed a faint dimness. She looked at her back and said, "The hot tea you wanted has not been served. Why are you in such a hurry to leave?" "That is the intoxicating grass that I specially brought from Peach Mountain. I remember that you liked it the most back then." Mo Shanshan stopped in her tracks. She did not turn back and replied calmly, "Compared to a cup of tea, I actually hope to see you in the camp under the meadow. Then you could treat me to a cup of plain water." Lu Qinjia's hand that was holding the small scissors turned pale. She said softly, "At the beginning, I did not know that you were in the camp. I also did not think that the horse gang could threaten you. If you were really in danger, do you think that I would still sit quietly in the carriage and ignore you?" Mo Shanshan reached out and held the side of the screen. She said, "I have said that this is not about you and me. It is about the world. You can ignore the external feelings of joy and sorrow, but I cannot and do not want to be that kind of person." The screen slid open, and the girl in white with an indifferent expression slowly walked out. The disciples of Black Ink Garden who were drinking tea outside and had nothing to do all stood up to welcome her. The students of Revelation Institute on the opposite side also stood up. Mo Shanshan looked at Zhuo Zhihua and nodded gently. Her peers then knew that the hill master was not polite to the flower addict during the conversation inside the room. Suddenly, their chests were filled with joy. Ignoring the enthusiasm of the Revelation Institute students to ask them to stay, and not even bothering to say a word, the disciples of Black Ink Garden proudly walked out of the magnificent tent with their heads held high. Outside the tent, the blue sky was high and far. There was not a single cloud. The girl in white squinted her eyes and looked at the sky. She thought about how Lu Qinjia had finally lowered her head and lost her arrogance. She could not help but feel relieved. Only then did she understand that this was bullying. Only then did she understand that the so-called revenge was not limited to words or fists. Thinking of this, she looked back at Ning Ke, who was standing quietly in the group of girls. She thought to herself, as a disciple of the Academy of the Tang Empire, he should be generous, but why is he so meticulous? The girls of the Great River Kingdom returned to their own campsite and could no longer suppress their curiosity. They began to ask the Hill Master what she had said to the flower addict. The tent was filled with chatter and bustle. Even Ning Ke looked towards her. After a moment of silence, Mo Shanshan repeated the previous conversation. The joys and sorrows of the world have nothing to do with her. Does senior brother's death under the meadow have nothing to do with her? It seems that we, the people of the world, are not even comparable to a flower in the eyes of the princess. Cat Girl held the box and said loudly, unable to suppress her anger. If this square box was a gift from Black Ink Garden to the Revelation Institute, why did she bring it back? The flower addict princess seems to be quiet and gentle, but her heart is not in the world. This matter has nothing to do with her. The ones who deserve to die are the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the old woman who is standing on the meadow and watching coldly. Zhuo Zhihua shook her head and looked at the box in Cat Girl's arms. She frowned and asked curiously, "What is this?" "This is a secret weapon. Yesterday, senior brother Zhong and I spent 100 taels of silver to buy it from someone." Cat Girl hugged the box tightly and snorted. She said indignantly, "It's a pity that senior sister Shanshan refused to use it." Mo Shanshan gently smoothed the paper on the table with her right hand. A few strands of hair fell from her ears. She said, "Even though Qinjia didn't say it, I have already taught her a lesson. There's no need to humiliate her further." Ning Ke could not help but shake his head when he heard this. In the traveling carriage, he had taught the calligraphy addict on the first day. There was an eternal truth that one had to be beaten to death. Asking for justice and bullying was not much different from beating someone up. Since they were going to fall out with each other, of course, they had to humiliate the other party to death. He looked at the calligraphy addict, who was about to start practicing calligraphy again. He suddenly realized that ever since he entered the back of the mountain of the academy, he had been obsessed with cultivation and had forgotten about writing for a long time. Suddenly, he realized something else. Ever since he had combed her hair once in the carriage at the tragic camp, she had maintained this hairstyle. Her black hair was simply tied behind her back, revealing her fair and beautiful face, making her look even more graceful and elegant. Zhuo Zhihua said to the crowd, "The Divine Hall will convene a meeting in the afternoon to discuss the matter of assisting the palace and sending troops against the desolate man next year. Disciples of all sects must attend. Everyone, eat early and don't waste time." The grassland people lived on mutton and there was no rice in their meals. Even though the palace had shown enough sincerity to the people from the Central Plains, the most expensive and scarce rice would, of course, be given to the Divine Hall and the Tang army first. Therefore, the disciples of the Black Ink Garden still had oily mutton and mutton soup for lunch today. No matter how much they cooked, mutton was still mutton. After leaving the Blue Loin Sea, these girls had almost never eaten anything else. Yesterday, they had eaten too many new things at the Gumumu meeting. At this time, looking at the plate full of mutton, they found it difficult to get sick of it. Only Ning Ke was still eating carefully. It was said that poor children matured early. So a child who had encountered a rare famine and was tortured to the point of death when he was young would never waste food when he grew up. While chewing slowly, his brain was also working quickly, thinking about other things. The horse gang from the grassland came to kill him, which meant that his identity must have been exposed. But he did not know to what extent and how many people in the palace knew of his existence. The Tang camp in the east was full of the elite cavalry of the northeast border military. What was the relationship between General Shu from Chang'an and Xiaohe? According to the analysis of His Majesty's secret edict before he left, once he revealed his identity, General Shu's buttocks should be sitting next to his buttocks. Until now, he still did not think that the big black horse was a big possibility of his identity being exposed. It had to be said that the great His Majesty and the handsome old Chow from the Spring Breeze Pavilion had met countless people in their lives, but they had made a big mistake in using Ning Quebec. If he was a general, he would definitely be able to defeat everyone, but if he was to be a gold medal secret agent, he would be quite a failure. After lunch, Ning Ke wiped his oily mouth and took the slightly heavy square box from Cat Girl and held it in his arms. Under the warm winter sun, he walked to the bustling area near the palace. The Gu Mumu gathered a large number of people. Where there were people, there would naturally be business. The lively grassland was where the merchants gathered. Other than the neighboring tribes selling their goods, there were also a few brave caravans from the Central Plains. Somehow, they managed to follow the Divine Temple's negotiation team to this place. The things in the box in his arms were goods that a merchant from the Yen Kingdom had specially brought to win the favor of the Chanyu princess. Last night, he had paid a high price of 100 taels of silver and even used the name of the flower addict Lu Qinjia to barely buy it. Since Mo Shanshan did not want to use it, and he could not bring it back to Chang'an, he naturally did not want it to freeze to death in the cold wilderness. So he decided to ask the Yen Kingdom merchant for a refund, even if it was only 80 taels of silver. Even though he was now an invisible tycoon in Chang'an, 100 taels of silver was a huge amount. Not to mention that he would not be able to report it to Sang Sang when he returned, even if it was only 80 taels of silver. However, before he reached the place, he was stopped by someone. Hearing the gradually gathering footsteps around him, Ning Ke could not help but raise his eyebrows as he looked at the cold and arrogant Revelation Institute student in front of him. He thought to himself that these people were after all believers of Haotian, and they would not be like the gangsters in Chang and West City who would pull out their swords after blocking the street. So he did not move. More than a dozen Revelation Institute students surrounded Ning Ke in the middle. They seemed to be standing loosely, but in fact, they had blocked all possible escape routes. However, as Ning Ke expected, these people did not rush up to beat him up. The arrogant Revelation Institute student in front of him even bowed politely. The student of the Revelation Institute said, "Senior brother of the Black Ink Garden, could you please meet someone?" Ning Ke completely believed that if he said it was not convenient, then what was going to happen next would be very inconvenient for the children to see. He was not afraid of anything, but he guessed that the person who could mobilize so many Revelation Institute students to invite him to meet must be that girl. So he smiled and obediently followed them. On a green meadow outside the tent, the princess of Yueluan Kingdom, Lu Qinjia, sat on a snow-white horse. She raised her hand and signaled for everyone to leave. There were only 2 people and a horse left on the meadow. She looked down at Ning Ke quietly with a strange expression. After a long time, she said softly, "I have known Shanshan for many years. Although we have not seen each other for a while, we still write to each other. What is strange is that the calligraphy addict who spoke to me in the tent today seems to have changed into another person." Ning Ke did not expect the girl on the horse to start asking questions so directly. He could not help but feel that it was a little sudden. He did not even have the time to look closely at what this legendary beauty looked like. Lu Qinjia did not wait for him to reply and said with a serious gaze, she said that she learned a lot from someone. Men are filthy things like mud, and women are pure spring water. Ning Ke looked at Lu Qinjia, who was on horseback. He smiled and said, "Is that what your highness is trying to say?" Lu Qinjia's expression changed slightly. She did not expect this dark and dirty man to be able to summarize her thoughts so accurately and concisely. While she was surprised, the pride hidden under her calm and gentle appearance prevented her from mocking Ning Ke again. Instead, she nodded. Ning Ke suddenly smiled and asked, "What about Prince Longqing?" During his discussion with Mo Shanshan last night, he had mentioned that the flower addict, Lu Qinjia, who had grown up around the White Tower and lived in the imperial palace since she was a child, was as pure as a piece of paper in terms of cultivation and love. They could only start from these two aspects if they wanted to grab hold of the gap between her and Prince Longqing. Everyone knew about her relationship with Prince Longqing, so her so-called feelings would naturally fall on that perfect man. Lu Qinjia sensed that the young man with the hateful smile on his face had brought up Prince Longqing. She smiled mockingly and said calmly, "An idiot like you would naturally not understand that a perfect and flawless man lives in the pure and bright world that you will never be able to touch." Hearing these words, especially the words, perfect and flawless, Ning Kai could not help but think of Song Song's evaluation of Prince Longqing in the wine shop in Chang'an. He could not help but shake his head and laugh. Lu Qinjia's face turned cold when she saw him laughing for no reason. That was because his laughter was obviously because of Prince Longqing. To her, this was even more serious than humiliating herself. Ning Kai suddenly stopped smiling and looked at the beautiful girl on the horse. He asked seriously, "In this world, other than the West Hill Divine Palace after the light and the wordless flowers and plants that you cherish so much, everything else is dirty and untouchable. Then I really want to know, Your Highness, do you really think that everything that happened on the meadow that day was clean?" Lu Qinjia looked into his eyes and said calmly, "That has nothing to do with me. I only know that if you want to use this to drive a wedge between me and Shanshan and lure her into the path of darkness, then you deserve to die." Ning Kai looked back into her eyes and said gently, "What are you saying? If Your Highness really wanted to kill me, you would have done so long ago. Why did you specially call me here to talk in private?" Lu Qinjia gently stroked the neck of the white horse and said softly, "I just want to remind you today that no matter what you are thinking, even if you can hide it from Shanshan, you can't hide it from me and everyone else in the world. You are just an insignificant person like a worm. There are many people in the world who can make you wish you were dead." Ning Kai's expression became gentler and calmer. He said softly, "What you are doing now seems to be the dirty methods of the world that you hate." Lu Qinjia looked at him and said, "Haotian saw the suffering of the world and turned herself into an old woman to help the people and kill the evil. I don't want to get involved in your dirty ways, but it doesn't mean that I will never use harsh methods." At this moment, there was no coldness or disgust in her eyes. There was only calmness and gentleness. However, this calmness and gentleness made one feel even more depressed. That was because the gaze in her clear and moving eyes seemed to be looking at a mudskipper struggling in the mud. There was no pity, just a natural look of disdain. She was the flower addict of the 3 addicts in the world. She was a fairy above the clouds and should not be tainted by dust. On the other hand, Ning Kai was just an insignificant person who tried to get close to another addict with some petty tricks. It was natural for her to look down on him. It was natural for her to want him to obey her words. There was no unnatural feeling. This was the norm in the world. Ning Kai had seen many colder gazes since he was young. His skin was as thick as a wall and he did not care about the girl's expression at all. He smiled and replied, "Being alive is definitely better than being dead. I really can't think of any situation that can make people feel that they are better off dead than alive." Lu Qinjia asked, "Are you really curious?" Ning Kai smiled and said, "This kind of thing is too dangerous. It's safer not to be curious." Lu Qinjia looked at him quietly and suddenly smiled. She said, "An insignificant person will always be an insignificant person. He only knows how to talk and play petty tricks. He will never dare to show the slightest bit of bravery in the real world." Perhaps the girl wanted to use these words to anger Ning Kai so that she would have a reason to punish him. Or perhaps she was just a little disappointed and emotional after seeing Ning Kai's performance. However, when Ning Kai heard this, he suddenly became silent. He looked up at the azure sky and at the cloud that was gradually floating above the meadow. He frowned slightly and began to think about some problems. After the journey, he reflected on the 2 years since he left the city of Wei. The winter wind blew from afar in the wilderness, blowing his clothes and Lu Qinjia's hair. He did not speak, and neither did Lu Qinjia. Both of them were silent on the horse and on the horse. When I was in the city of Wei, the highest official was General Ma. That general only had a few hundred people under him. He was really powerful. However, I have seen General Shao Qi of the 7th Link Stockade Village once. I was very excited because I was rewarded for my meritorious service. Ning Ke was not like second brother, who had reached the knowing destiny state. He was also not like youngest uncle, who had left Jianghu for a long time but was still a legend. He was just a newcomer and his state was pathetically at no doubt state. However, he was still a student at the back of the mountain of the academy and a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy. He did not have the ability to defeat the 3 addicts of the world. He could not drag Lu Qinjia off the horse, take off her pants, and spank her bare butt until it turned red. Then, he could ask Mo Shanshan to draw a sketch and send it to Prince Longqing. However, since he had already understood that he should leave the world of insignificant people and decided to reveal his identity, he naturally had his own way. When I bought this gift yesterday, I told the merchant from the Yen Kingdom that it was for you. Only then did he agree to sell it to me. I spent 100 taels of silver on it. It's not cheap. Ning Ke picked up the square box that he had been holding in his arms and untied the cloth on it. In the box was a small flower tree that was secured by a straw frame and protected by a paper film. He tore off the paper film and showed Lu Qinjia the breathtakingly beautiful blue petals and green stems. He said, "Of course, even if I gave this flower to you now, I believe that you would not change your opinion of me. So, I'm just letting you take a look." Lu Qinjia was slightly stunned. She looked at the blue flower tree in his hands and recognized that it was an extremely rare 7-petal blue lotus. This lotus was blue in color and extremely beautiful. Unfortunately, even though this flower was resistant to drought and cold, it was often accompanied by extremely strong nemeses. Therefore, there were very few of them in the world. The 7-petal blue lotus is indeed a good flower. It's not expensive to sell it for 100 taels of silver in the wilderness. Even though Lu Qinjia hated Ning Ke, she was a flower addict and naturally loved flowers. Her evaluation was extremely objective and honest. Then, she frowned slightly and reprimanded, "Even if the 7-petal blue lotus is resistant to cold, it is still a plant from the south of Yen. How can it withstand the cold wind in the wilderness? Hurry up and put away the paper film." Ning Ke was very obedient. The girl on the horse asked him to keep it, so he kept it. However, he did not keep the rare flower tree in his hands, but the hands that were holding the flower pot. The flowering tree slipped from his hands and instantly fell to his feet. When it touched the hard ground of the wilderness, the flower pot cracked and shattered like fragile glass. The paper film of the straw rack was all smashed. The beautiful flowering tree inside suddenly became unrecognizable. Its petals were scattered and its green branches were broken. It seemed that it would never come back to life again. Lu Qinjia's expression changed drastically. She pulled the reins and took a few steps forward, but she could not stop this from happening. The beautiful blue petals were scattered on the ground. They rolled slowly in the wind and were stained with a lot of dust. The straw frame and paper film covered the rustling flower tree. The scene was extremely messy. She looked at the broken flowers on the ground in front of the horse and her beautiful face suddenly paled. Her eyes revealed a look of pity. Then, she slowly turned around and looked at Ning Ke quietly. She said, "Are you provoking me?" Tragedy was tearing the beauty of life apart and showing it to others. Everyone saw the beauty of life differently. The things that they cherished and loved were also different. Money, beauty, power, knowledge, cultivation, and so on. In Lu Qinjia's heart, the beauty of life was not the happiness of the secular world, but the flowers and plants that had nothing to do with the secular world. The deaths of the people in the camp below the meadow did not make her sad. Even if the cavalrymen of Divine Hall and the students of the Revelation Institute fell in front of her, she would not feel sad. But when the 7-petal blue lotus was smashed into the mud in front of her, she really felt a wave of heartache. She knew that the young man in front of the horse had done it on purpose. So besides feeling heartache, she started to get angry. Hearing the sound of the flower pot breaking, the students of the Revelation Institute who were scattered around the meadow did not know what had happened. They rushed over as fast as they could. When they saw the broken flowers on the ground and the unconcealable pain and anger in Princess Lu Qinjia's eyes, they vaguely guessed what had happened. Everyone knew that Her Highness was crazy about flowers. This young man in the uniform of the Black Ink Garden actually dared to do such a thing in front of Her Highness. That was the greatest harm to Her Highness. It was a shameless provocation. With a series of clangs, the steel swords engraved with the talisman patterns of the Divine Hall were unsheathed. Everyone angrily surrounded Ning Quebec. Lu Qinjia got off the horse and walked towards Ning Quebec. She frowned and asked, "What good does my sadness and anger do to you?" Ning Ke looked at her and explained with a smile, "In the tent this morning, you once told Shanshan that the sadness and happiness of the world have nothing to do with you. So I think that my relationship with Shanshan and how I affect her has nothing to do with you. As for this 7-petal blue lotus, I was the one who bought it. So me smashing it has nothing to do with you. Whether you are sad or angry because of this has nothing to do with me. Since that is the case, it is none of your business if I smash it for fun." Lu Qinjia looked into his eyes and said, "Flowers can't speak. They only bloom quietly. But in your hands, they have become a sacrifice in the battle between people. Don't you think that this is unfair to them?" Ning Ke looked into her eyes and said, "Those who died in the meadow, such as the senior brother from the Black Ink Garden, can't speak now either. So this world is unfair to them. Of course, I am not someone who likes to fight for injustice. What I care about is that you threatened me earlier, so I have to make you unhappy. That is very fair." Lu Qinjia suddenly asked, "Who exactly are you?" The shattering of the blue lotus on the meadow in the wilderness seemed like a small matter, but in reality, it was like a hard slap to the girl's face. Moreover, she was not an ordinary girl. She was one of the 3 addicts in the world. She had the Yueluan kingdom and the Divine Hall behind her. She was someone who was favored by both Buddhism and Taoism. Even the prince of the Tang Empire would not provoke her in such a way. So even though she was furious, she was still trying to guess Ning Ke's identity. Was he a daring and foolish person, or did he have a powerful background that allowed him to be unafraid of the Taoism and Buddhism sects? The first thing that was revealed was not Ning Ke's identity, but another identity that Lu Qinjia and the students of the Revelation Institute wanted to know, the identity of the owner of the big black horse. Ning Ke put his finger between his lips and blew a clear and even shrill whistle. After a while, loud hoofbeats sounded in the field to the north of the camp. The hoofbeats were messy and dense, as if the horses were in high spirits and happy. The big black horse came from afar and rushed to the meadow. Then, it walked carefully to Ning Ke's side and gently nudged his shoulder. It looked unusually docile. The unusually handsome snow horse behind Lu Qinjia suddenly saw the big black horse appear in front of it. It remembered the painful experience yesterday and was not comforted by the big black horse's docile expression. It retreated in fear. The reins broke free from Lu Qinjia's hand. Lu Qinjia looked at Ning Ke and the big black horse beside him, as well as the broken flowers and branches at his feet. Ning Ke's gentle expression finally disappeared. She stared at him coldly and said, "So, it's all because of you." Ning Ke cupped his hands in greeting and said gently, "Yes." The big black horse was the focus of everyone's discussion during the Gumumu gathering. The Chanyu of the palace and many other bigwigs were looking for it. They wanted to make it their own mount. Its sudden appearance had attracted countless people in the tribe. A dense crowd chased after it and came to the meadow at the same time. Lu Qinjia's voice was slightly cold as she said, "Do you think I won't dare to kill you just because there are so many people watching? I've said it before. You filth in the mortal world only know how to use petty tricks. You don't know that strength is everything. I know I'm weak, but I also know that strength doesn't mean everything. Ning Ke took out an waist token from his chest and held it in the air. He said, sometimes, background is more important. A student of the Revelation Institute saw the words on the waist token and frowned. He said, Fish Dragon Sect, what is this? Ning Ke was slightly stunned. He looked at the waist token and smiled. Sorry, I took the wrong one. He changed the waist token and held it in front of Lu Qinjia. The expressions of the students of the Revelation Institute changed slightly. Someone shouted, so what if you're a student of the academy? Ning Ke shook his head and said, you should have looked more closely. The students of the Revelation Institute took a closer look and saw clearly what this token represented. Everyone fell into a state of shock and silence. They did not know what to do with the Divine Hall swords in their hands. Lu Qinjia also saw the waist token clearly. Her gaze turned cold. Is there anyone who wants to kill me now? Ning Ke looked at the students of the Revelation Institute around him and said sincerely, if no one wants to kill me, then I'll leave first. The meeting that the Divine Hall has called should have started. I don't have much time to waste. Then he looked at Lu Qinjia and said with a smile, I have a few words to say to you. First, if the difference between a small character and a big character is not their character, but their background, sect, or family, then I'm not a small character. Second, you don't have the ability to make me wish I was dead. I think even the three great gods of the Divine Hall don't have the ability to make me wish I was dead. So I hope that when we meet again in the future, Your Highness, you don't have to say so much nonsense. Finally, there's no perfect person in the world. Of course I'm not. Your partner Prince Long Qing isn't either. At least in front of me, he probably doesn't have the confidence to say such words. With that, Ning Ke mounted the big black horse, lifted the reins and galloped toward the camp. Before he mounted the horse, he stepped on the 7-petal blue lotus that was scattered on the ground. No one knew if it was intentional or not, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.